Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 146 of Through the Years, the podcast reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, and I'm joined, as always, by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, I don't know what to say.
Well, I'll say this. We have reached the time of year when recording is kind of painful because it is very hot outside and we cannot run air conditioners or fans. And this is the beginning of the first heat wave of the year. So I'm going to be struggling by the end of this. So thank you for listening and you better listen till the end because if you don't, I'm going to be real mad that I had to sweat for nothing. Come on. What is that all about?
Yeah. How can you ask him to pay sweat equity and you not give him his return? But
That's right.
Matt, that was what I was starting to get into that our summer podcast, Sweat Your Ass Off season last episode. As I told you right before the show, the weather's been down today in my area. So actually, this is probably the last time in months I'm going to be able to enjoy wearing socks during the podcast. So
wow,
an incredible time.
So you're still going to wear socks the other episode. You're just not going to enjoy it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. It's going to be horrifying.
Yeah, it was like not even like warm like the weekend before this past one. Like it was like this last weekend. It was like, I don't know, in the 60s Fahrenheit, which is unseasonably cool for June. And now it looks like on Tuesday, it's going to be 101 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like not the heat index. That's the actual temperature here in New York City. So, scary times.
Yeah, well, where I live in like one of the hot spots of Canada. So like that number is an old friend. In Celsius format. We don't do your
101 degrees Celsius. Oh my God, you're a bunch of spirits that can survive all temperatures.
We're very much Scientology here. We're all spirits going into the lava. But Matt, we forgot last episode to do something we always do, which is to sum up the last episode. So very quickly, good times, great memories. The show we covered last episode. It was good.
Oh yeah, I thought it was one of the better shows of the year, I would say. Lots of good stuff. Eventful, good matches. Yeah, I'd say great crowd. Excellent show. I would say either A or I would say a B tier. Like if you're listening like all of the ROH shows of all time that we ever reviewed, I'd say it was maybe like the second from the top level. I would say like really, really high level show.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. And we have a lot to cover this time because as always on the show, being a chronological review podcast, we cover what happened in ROH's timeline between the last episode and the one we're covering tonight. And of course, there was one huge piece of news that happened in the timeline between the last episode and this, with lots of coverage. And we'll go to the Observer for that. And that story, of course, being according to the Observer, Takeshi Morishima defended the ROH title on May 6th at Differ Ariake on a GPWA, the alliance of about a dozen promotions, the Japan show, against Kazma, who is one of Taka Michinoku's K-Dojo Promotions top stars. So that was the huge story. I'll note Morishima beat Kazma in 17 minutes, 17 seconds. And for those who don't know Kazma, obviously what Dave just wrote, he was a Kai-en-Tai dojo student, but he was one of those guys that he went on to a whole bunch of places. He went everywhere. He had stints in Wrestle One, Noah, Dragon Gate. He even had a short-lived run in WWE Developmental from 2011 into 2013 as Sakamoto. He had even if you watched NXT religiously back then in the early days, you saw him on there a couple times. He's currently in GLEAT, the most fun named promotion out there right now. Matt, I would just say, I think if you made a Sporkle quiz of people who have wrestled for the RH World title, Kazma might be the hardest answer, unless you've listened to this episode recently.
Yeah, I would say so. Was that that Danielson versus Kamala match, was that for the ROH title? It was, right?
I'm not sure, but
but the point is, I was going to say, I think whether it was or it wasn't, enough people out there have heard of that match that a lot of people would guess Kamala before, and certainly before they'd guess Kazma.
Yeah, that's such a weird novelty match to it, like sticks in your head. I think a lot of people remember that match without even seeing it because it's such a weird thing. Like, hey, do you remember like in 2006 when Bryan Danielson wrestled Kamala? Like that just seems like such a it's hard to forget that Bryan Danielson wrestled Kamala. I think when I have dementia in like 15 years, that'll be like one of the last things about wrestling that leaves my brain. I'll be like not knowing where I live, but I will remember that Bryan Danielson wrestled Kamala. But
Well, now, without commenting on your pessimism about your brain, I do wonder though, like, will a lot of people guess Chasma, not guess Chasma also because, like, sometimes you throw out random guesses and how, like, if I had asked you before you did research for this show, have you heard of a wrestler named Chasma? Would you have said yes? Like, was that name even existing in
no,
your brain
no.
until you did this research?
It was one of those things where I probably remember reading this in the Observer at the time, like a decade and a half ago, and it instantly fell out of my head
Right,
after I read
right.
it, and it will probably fall out of my head again a few months from now. But yeah, I would not have known to guess. I don't, you know, he is not a giant name on the Japanese scene, but he has, had to his credit an extensive career popping up in all sorts of places, and he did get that sweet, sweet early tens WWE developmental money. That sweet, sweet, not as high as what top names made on the indies in that era developmental money, but Matt, to be that was me talking in jest about that being the big story. Of course, the real biggest thing that happened in the world of ROH between the last show and this was, of course, ROH announcing that they were going to pay-per-view. They had Kerry Silken, the owner, do it in a video that you can still find on YouTube. And I had some internal debate on how to cover it for this show because a couple rules I have for the podcast are when something happens in the ROH timeline, we cover it on the next show. And when something happens related to a specific show, we cover it on the episode that reviews that show. And normally those two rules don't contradict each other. They go together like peanut butter and jelly. And the problem is this time it kind of does because the pay-per-view got announced, but the next show wasn't the pay-per-view. The next show was the show we're covering tonight, which is the ROH's usual Friday night B-show taking place the night before the big show on Saturday, the next day, which is the pay-per-view. So I was left with this question, like, do I cover all the news around the pay-per-view announcement, everything right now? Do I try and cover it on the next show? What I've decided to do is to try to split the difference. There is a ton of news and newsletter coverage of the pay-per-view itself. Like, this might be the most ROH coverage the promotion has gotten in the newsletters and online since the Feinstein scandal. And so a lot of it, maybe more than probably 60% of it or more, we'll cover on the next show. But the story of this show that we're covering today is partially the changes that happened as a result of the move to pay-per-view. So I'm going to try and pluck the coverage of just that aspect of the story for this episode and everything that really revolves around the move to pay-per-view. We're going to go to that show. There's a ton of both. And so I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can. But Matt, anytime you want, I'll probably find a few times to stop so we can talk about things I've just talked about. But if you have any comments at all, barge in, just ram it in on me, Matt, and you will, and whatever. So
finally, I've been waiting for you to say that to me for many years, Trevor.
Finally, the will we, won't we, cheer sexual tension. It finally comes to a head on episode 146. But, so for the big fault that affected the show, we'll go to the Wrestling Observer first. In the Observer, Dave wrote at the time, the face of the second tier of U.S. wrestling promotions changed this week when Ring of Honor announced it will be doing taped pay-per-view shows every other month. And in response, TNA pulled all its talent, not only from ROH, but made decisions that may lead to its talent no longer working several other independent groups. ROH first approached 10 wrestlers on WrestleMania weekend in Detroit about signing 6-page contracts, which included merchandising rights. Thus far, they have 15 wrestlers under contract. Terms haven't been revealed, but it is believed that these are are exclusive contracts that prevent the talent from going to either TNA or WWE for the term of the contracts. The talent would be able to work indies, but not appear on television. If any indie group would get on pay-per-view, ROH would also have priority when it comes to booking of the booking of these wrestlers. Now, Dave's going to say something in a future observer we'll get to in a minute that kind of says the exact opposite of that in terms of TV and pay-per-view availability. We'll get to that in a second. Dave continues, it is believed all the wrestlers who signed were given a modest pay increase. The overall payroll for the company is going to stay similar because the company will be saving an estimated $3,000 per weekend they ran without the cost of paying transportation from the West Coast and other expenses like hotel rooms for Samoa Joe and Christopher Daniels, as well as saving costs for Homicide and Austin Aries, although it's clear they are hoping to get Aries back when his TNA contract expires. Danielson, McGuinness, Mark and Jay Briscoe, who were approached in the last week by TNA, Roderick Strong, Davey Richards, and Jimmy Rave are among those who have signed. The signing of Danielson also means Danielson will be priority booked by ROH, so he will not become the touring NWA World Heavyweight Champion as had been planned after TNA returned the NWA singles and tag team titles to the NWA, which
I totally forgot that that's like those two things are connected. Like that idea was dropped for Danielson because ROH went to pay-per-view. It makes a lot of sense, but do you believe what they said about the amount of money that the payroll price staying the same even after contracts because of not having Joe and Daniels?
I'm not sure, and something we'll get to in a minute too that also affects that is they start having offering wrestlers health insurance, which is another big added expense. Now I don't know if you want to count that as payroll, but yeah, there's some. I don't know if I. And that is an interesting thing about ROH, right? The idea that like they paid for hotels for guys. You know, I mean, that was signed that WWE does not pay for hotels.
Which is, I mean, still beyond insane, by the way.
Yeah. There was that clip that became like, I don't know if I would say viral, but kind of passed around a little bit where Maven on his YouTube channel, you know, did a video where he visited backstage AEW and he was like shocked they paid for hotels because that was just such a norm, you know, that WWE doesn't pay for hotels. Yeah, it is crazy. So, and yeah, we'll get to a bit more about the NWA stuff too, because there's like an interesting wrinkle about how this TNA, ROH moving to pay-per-view affects the NWA. But anyway, you know, that move, Dave continues that move with the title, NWA titles is expected to take place imminently. Pro Wrestling Noah has given ROH its blessings to use its talent on pay-per-view shows. Even though TNA had consistently booked talent to ROH, they were unaware any negotiations were going on and learned of the pay-per-view plans when they were announced publicly on May 2nd. According to sources in TNA, management was okay at first with its talent continuing there as long as the matches wouldn't air on pay-per-view. However, after saying that the contracts called for more growth, including plans for wider distribution of DVDs and merchandise, as well as signing contracts with wrestlers that prohibited them from going to TNA, the feeling became that ROH was now competition. At that point, TNA officially terminated the relationship, including canceling scheduled dates for Samoa Joe to return on shows in August and October, including a second match with Morishima. A split between the two companies was inevitable once the pay-per-view deal was signed. So the thing about the Joe stuff that's always interesting is everyone says that one of the matches that was on the books was that second match with Morishima, but I think Morishima even in October would have still been champion. It's like, what would they have done there? Because clearly they weren't going to put the belt back on Joe as like a guy that came in once in a blue moon. They clearly were setting it up to be him dropping it to Nigel. So how do you do that match again?
I mean, they could have just would they have dared done a 60-minute draw with those two guys? I mean, obviously, we know Joe could have done it. Would Morishima have tried? I mean, you know, I wouldn't rule it out. As crazy as it sounds on paper, like in that era, that was something that people did, you know?
Yeah, and also I feel like 60-minute matches on the indies in this era they were initially kind of booked as like, oh, this will get DVD sales because of just the novelty of it. And I think at this point we'd gotten to the point where enough places had done 60-minute matches to kind of capitalize on that the novelty was starting to go away. But I feel like, oh, these two, like Morishima's doing a 60-minute match with Joe. I feel like just the can he do it novelty of it probably would have helped.
I should look up what Morishima's longest singles match was. I'm going to try to do that.
Okay. The other thing I thought that was interesting was, TNA not even knowing that ROH was negotiating for pay-per-views until it was announced publicly online, which in a way I guess makes sense because if you're ROH, you probably want to keep that a secret and control the announcement yourself. And if you're doing a move that's going to kind of force a split between TNA, and you always haven't had the greatest relationship, an up and down relationship with them to begin with, do you trust them not leaking that when they have no motivation to keep that quiet? But I imagine TNA, that must have been like a weird thing to be like, oh, you wake up and you find out with everyone else that ROH has done this. But then we go to PW Insider. TNA sources acknowledged that the decision to pull their talent will likely upset ROH fans, but they felt they had no chance after learning about ROH's pay-per-view expansion yesterday via the internet. There's no word why the pulled talents couldn't appear on matches that wouldn't be aired on the taped pay-per-view events. ROH booker Gabe Sapolsky declined comment on the situation when contacted this morning, but given the way the ROH storylines have phased out TNA performers, this likely was not an unexpected move. And then we're going to jump to the PW Torch, where Wade and Friends wrote, Homicide and Austin Aries were pulled from ROH by TNA after ROH announced their move to pay-per-view last week. The move is effective immediately. The day after announcing the date of their first pay-per-view, ROH found out that they would no longer be able to use any TNA talent on upcoming shows. ROH had already phased out most of the remaining TNA talent prior to their pay-per-view announcement. Only Homicide and Austin Aries remained with the company, but both had been booked in a manner in which they would be expendable if TNA pulled them once the announcement came. And then we go to Bryan Alvarez at Figure 4 Weekly. I get to pick on Bryan Alvarez a little bit, which in the real world timeline has been very plentiful. The internet's been enjoying that this week. And so Bryan wrote in Figure 4 Weekly, once word came down that ROH was moving to pay-per-view, TNA immediately pulled all talent. Now keep in mind that ROH's first pay-per-view isn't until July, and the first taping doesn't take place for another month. No matter. I don't know what Brian's talking about here. It sounds like he's trying to beat up on TNA, like how unfair this is. This whole announcement came like the pay-per-view taping is in May. It's the day after this show that we're going to cover, and ROH announced they were moving to pay-per-view like a week and a half before the pay-per-view. So this idea
it wasn't this long time buildup.
Like when I'm reading all this coverage, a lot of this coverage is like, how unfair is it of TNA to do this? It's like I'm a person that's not afraid to criticize TNA. Trust me, and my history shows that. But like this isn't. I don't think this is a bad reaction on their part, especially again where those contracts did prevent ROH talent from signing with TNA. So this idea of I can see why would TNA want to do that at that point. But anyway, Brian.
I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about TNA's side of it. Like, I mean, I don't think it's completely unreasonable. I don't know if it was the best move for them. I am sort of somebody who thinks that on some level it was good for ROH to reshuffle the deck and lose some of these legends that really weren't feeling super relevant to the product. So I sort of think of it from that perspective rather than like, was it fair of TNA?
Yeah. The Brian continues, and there will be a little bit more to that TNA angle too, because there's a little bit of disagreement there. But Brian continues in the Figure 4. Homicide and Austin Aries were both pulled, the latter of which was irate since he's already been suspended for 90 days by TNA. Gabe has seen this coming, so it wasn't a major deal. And in fact, he'd been working under the assumption that the guys needed to be written out of storylines soon anyway. Joe and Chris Daniels had recently been written out. Joe's planned occasional returns, by the way, are now off the books. Homicide had already been told that his run basically ended when he won the title. Gabe compared it to the movie Rocky, where the whole story was building towards him winning the belt, and the second movie sort of breezed through some title defenses before moving on to the next story. Rocky was never about his defenses. It was about the road to the title. I gotta stop here again. Rocky doesn't, okay, spoilers for a movie that happened in the mid-70s, but Rocky doesn't win at the end of Rocky. Rocky loses by split decision. The whole point of that movie is he just wanted to go the distance because he was such an underdog, and he did. The second movie, he wins the world title at the end of the second movie, and the third movie breezes through a bunch of title defenses. So Bryan basically
you're a Rocky pedant. But
I was a big Rocky fan as a kid.
I was too, actually. But I will say, yes, the Rocky 3 breezes through a bunch of title defenses, but that movie is about his title reign. Like, it's about him as champion. Yes, he loses it, and he wins it back, but it's not like him as champion was not interesting to people. Like, that was a very successful movie. His match against Thunderlips was while he was champion.
I like that you said that in a tone that almost acted like it was real.
That's right.
But yeah, you're exactly right. Because like the first third of that movie is like about Rocky becoming a celebrity as champion, at like getting soft and not being prepared for the horror of Clubber Lang. But anyway, Bryan continues, Ares was a major player, but he was also a major player in a gang wars faction storyline, so his removal can be worked around. The contracts are mostly to prevent guys from being signed by TNA, as the only ROH star who WWE has signed recently was Colt Cabana, which most people figured was a given at some point. I'm told WWE isn't interested in anyone else in the company at this point. TNA has way too much talent as it is, nearly none of whom would be considered big draws, but they're always looking at signing guys, so that potential is there. Gabe has always been in a Jim Cornette / OVW situation in that he has ideas for long-term storylines that would sometimes be prevented when his stars signed with other companies, or in Cornette's case, got called up to the WWE with almost no notice. Usually Gabe was allowed some time to write guys out of storylines before they moved up until last week at least. So a couple things there. First, it's crazy to me, and we've had a bunch of stories like this over the course of through the years, but like, you look at the roster ROH has right now, the WWE would be like, yeah, we have no interest with anybody here right now. Like, what? It's just insane. And like, it's not how things change.
Nigel was somebody that's like, why wouldn't they have interest in him? Like, I'm trying to figure it out. Why would 2007 WWE not be interested in Nigel McGuinness?
Yeah, it is just one of those moments. It's one of those things where that would not happen today. If you had an indie with the roster of talent that ROH had in this era, they would be plucked clean. The bones would be clean, Matt.
Even a couple years after this.
Yeah, and
by the way, Morishima had a 30-minute draw with Marufuji in 2010. Just FYI.
So he could go they could do a lot of stalling. They could Larry Zbyszko it up. But
yeah.
The other point I thought that was interesting to do with this, and good research, by the way, but the other thing I thought was interesting about this is we had wondered for a while about how, like, watching all these shows, rewatching them, like, boy, it's crazy how Homicide's title reign, like, he was so hot, and then as soon as he wins the title, it was like, oh, we're out of stuff for you. And it was good to read here in the Figure 4 that Gabe apparently explicitly told him, like, this was by design. Like, I did not see you as a guy I saw you as a guy that was only for the chase, and that, like, that was the end. And I guess it was like, you know, Gabe maybe saw this coming and was just like, I'm going to phase you out, but I'm giving you this on the way out. So I would love to have been a fly in the wall for him telling Homicide that, because that's a weird thing. Like, that's got to be a weird conversation to have where someone's like, I'm going to book you for, like, the biggest moment you've ever had in this company, and you've been here for 5 years. And then, like, that's it. Like, that's a very weird it's like, I'm giving you a raise, but then you're going to lose this job in a year. Like that.
It is weird. I mean, you know, I guess maybe it's a little bit, the blow is softened by the fact that he was doing fairly well in TNA at the time, which was, you know, I guess a bigger company. I mean, it was on TV at least. Like, so, but yeah, no, I mean, I feel like him and Gabe had at least a long time professional relationship where, you know, I don't know how that would come off. Do you think that that's a disrespectful attitude of Gabe?
No, I think there's a tactful way to say it, especially if you frame it as in, like, we're just phasing out, you know, TNA guys to begin with, so it's not personal. I think I would agree with the sentiment. I think we talked about this during Homicide's brief reign that he was a guy that was going to be better as a chaser than as champion, but I do feel like he could have been given more of a run to confirm that. Although that being said, his run was 3 title defenses, and the first 2 were kind of disappointing in different weird ways. You had the Chris Hero match where like Chris Hero kind of dominated that match and ate him up a little bit personality wise, and Homicide took this weird back seat to him. And then you had the infamous Joe match that was not terrible, but got derailed by grandmothers. Go back to listen to the episode if you think that's a euphemism for something. It isn't. And then the match you and I both agree is very good. The Jimmy Rave match that main evented a big New York show is kind of criminally underrated because people just remember the Morishima match, or people go, oh, Jimmy Rave and Homicide main evented a big show, and it's like, well, if you actually watch the match, it's a very good match.
Yeah, I mean, if you had more title defenses against the people that were having the best matches during that time period, whether it's like, a Danielson again, or Nigel, or Aries, or Strong, or even like a Davey Richards, or, someone like that, maybe it would be different. Who knows?
Yeah, like one of my pet peeves is when people are like, when a guy as a champion gets no time with a title, and then people say, oh, he was only he's a better chaser than a champion. And to me, it's like, again, I feel like if they had given Homicide a longer reign, I probably would have still ended in that same conclusion. But when you give a guy a title, you kind of have to check that. I mean, you don't have to, but I feel like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you don't, because sometimes a wrestler can surprise you. Someone might be might be good as a champion, even if you see him as more of an underdog challenger character. But something else I want to mention quick here before we get to some other stuff. There is some disagreement or some confusion, at least on my part, about did TNA strictly pull their talent from ROH in this era or not? Because a lot of the reporting I just read makes it sound like TNA outright pulled guys. But I saw some stuff in the Observer in 2008, where that's when ROH started to book TNA talent for little one-off non-pay-per-view appearances. And TNA was apparently saying at that time, hey, we were always okay for this to happen with ROH to book guys like this, as long as they didn't book our talent on their pay-per-views. But again, like the language of the reporting at this time seems to indicate it was like TNA had that mindset, but then kind of decided, wait, they're really going hard on this contract stuff. And then we were just blanket pulling people. So either way, I agree with what you said earlier, which is, it was probably good for ROH just to freshen things up, to lose the TNA talent. And also looking at 2008, whether in 2007 TNA was very strict about pulling the talent off or would have been okay with using them on non-pay-per-view shows, I think ROH probably would have went this way regardless. Because I think in 2008, the reason why it was easier for ROH and TNA to start to work together for that year a little bit again is because, to spoil how a saga is going to end, ROH's pay-per-view move to pay-per-view does not dramatically help their business in any way. And so by 2008, ROH is probably a little bit more willing to be like, well, we still need some kind of ways to pop some occasional shows. And TNA is probably like, ROH is not going to be a threat to us at this point. Pay-per-view has not transformed this company. And so I would guess that's a big reason why you see that stuff happen again in 2008. And then we go to the Observer for another bit. This is going to start out not really about ROH, but then it kind of circles back, and I thought was just an interesting sign of the times. Dave writes, during the week, TNA's relationship with 2 other major indie groups, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla based in Los Angeles and the UWA based in Mississauga, Ontario, also changed for similar reasons. The timing was simultaneous of word going out, but that was just coincidental. In recent weeks, TNA had sent contracts to all independent promotions that they booked their talent to. The contracts allowed the promotions to produce DVDs with TNA talent and sell them at their shows or on their websites, or in other ways marketed by the promotion. However, the wrestlers would not be allowed to air on television, nor appear on DVDs sold through any third party, most notably highspots.com, which is the PWG DVD distributor. PWG would have been allowed to continue to book TNA talent, but couldn't put them on DVDs sold by High Spots. I lost my TNA made the decision when it came to highspots.com that since they also sell DVDs through highspots.com, they no longer wanted competition that was using TNA contracted talent. When PWG decided to end relations with TNA on May 3rd, TNA took it as a decision that they needed Highspots more than they needed TNA talent and canceled the appearances of Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley at the DDT4 tag team tournament on May 19th and 20th. PWG also canceled its future bookings with Frankie Kazarian, Daniels, Joe, Loki, and AJ Styles. It is believed that PWG sells a few hundred DVDs of its biggest events. Many other promotions TNA books talent with, including the IWC in Pennsylvania, Jersey All-Pro, and MCW, signed the agreement sent out in April. The situation with the UWA is that the company reached a broadcast deal with the Fight Network in Canada, which airs TNA Explosion. UWA would be allowed to use TNA talent on its shows, but they could not tape their matches for airing on the Fight Network. TNA is open to UWA booking TNA talent for house shows, or if they sign the same agreement stating that they will only sell the DVDs of those talent at their own shows and on their website. In theory, these changes hurt some of the lower card wrestlers who were hit the hardest when TNA stopped paying for hotel rooms and rental cars at TV and relied on dates from these companies for a significant portion of their income. The big stars like Joe Styles and Daniels are not going to be hurt significantly, and it's believed that all have weekly guarantees from TNA, plus TNA is expected to expand its own house show business this year, making up for the lost dates. Whether the lower-level wrestlers like Low-Key or Chris Sabin will be booked regularly enough by TNA to make up for the losses remains to be seen. The one wrestler who ended up taking the biggest hit from what went down this past week is Austin Aries. Aries is serving a 90-day suspension from TNA, but was using ROH as his main income. Aries was unlike all the other TNA wrestlers who have been phased down for months. Once TNA told ROH that they couldn't have Joe as a regular on almost every show, ROH phased out Daniels and Homicide, figuring their being pulled was inevitable. However, ROH figured Aries was not a key figure in TNA, and they wouldn't be so quick as to pull him. Aries himself has tried to get a contract release so he could work where he wants, but it hasn't been granted at press time. His TNA contract expires this summer, and one would expect him to leave and sign with ROH, but TNA has an option to renew the contract at its current terms. There are those in TNA who don't want him back, but now that ROH is on pay-per-view, they are opposition, and it becomes handing a talented wrestler to opposition, so the mentality could change. So yeah, I guess that explains a lot too, like why everyone started to get phased out. Like, well, not being Daniels and Homicide in the booking was the Joe getting pulled probably is being pointed to as the thing that made them think, well, if they could pull Joe, they could probably pull anybody, and so we can't put too much stock in anyone except Aries. And we've talked before about why Aries got suspended on a recent show where, you know, he didn't want to work to tape vignettes on his birthday when he thought that was his day off from the company, and TNA got pissed. And that does also explain why Aries is the one guy ROH didn't really face down the booking. They were still booking him in a fairly major position, was they assumed that, you know, Aries wants out, he's going to get out of TNA. And they're right. He's gone for a little short bit, but he does, by the second pay-per-view, he's back appearing. So, that all occurs. We will now go to the Observer's TNA section where they write, there was a ton of complaining from the undercard wrestlers regarding the ban on them going to ROH, PWG, and UWA. The morale really took a major turn for the worse months back when they stopped paying for hotel rooms and ground transportation, and the guys on the bottom are the ones hit the hardest, and then they get regular dates taken away with no way to make up the money. There's also the frustration of no matter how good you perform, there's very limited upward mobility, and the guys losing the indie dates are the ones who are stuck in the same position no matter how hard they work or how much the crowd reacts to them. Also, the company has cut down on flight expenses, so they are booking flights on cheaper airlines like Southwest. So, yeah, again, that's another crazy thing. ROH is the one company of WWE, TNA, and this company booking hotels or things like that. And, you know, we talked before on other shows about like the weird position TNA was in, almost that too big to be small, too small to be big, where, yeah, wrestlers on the lower card were often in this weird position where TNA would be making demands of them, but they weren't paying them enough to be like full time, where they didn't also have to rely on other companies, and it puts them in weird positions like this where, oh, you're now telling me I can't work for certain companies, so that's kind of going to lower my potential destinations and my income and all this stuff. But Matt, amidst all this serious stuff, Matt, I think it's time for a little levity. So Homicide posted a goodbye to ROH, and he will do a non-camera goodbye to ROH in the arena on the next show, the pay-per-view. But we'll talk about that a little when it happens. But he posted a goodbye to the fans at this point on his MySpace. Yes, Homicide had a MySpace, and that you're not going to see all the delightful spelling errors here or punctuation problems here, but I'm going to try to read this from Homicide word for word as he typed it, and I will just say, enjoy. This is Homicide. Quote, I remember the first time Rob and Doug came up to me and say, would you be part of a company that three guys are building called Ring of Honor? I say yes. At that time, I was working for one company and a great company called JAPW. Since day one, I was tearing the house down. I became a household. I had stitches and broke my shoulder. Had the most infamous feud with Logan DeVito, Steve Carino, American Dragon, Colt Cabana, Samoa Joe, my drinking buddies, the Briscoe brothers, to my last feud with Adam Pearce and Brent Albright. I had so much fun for the 5 years. Jersey All Pro is my home fed and love that company, but I really love that small company that now turning something really big that called Ring of Honor. Thank you, Philly, Dirty Jers, Long Island, Dayton, Chicago, UK, Cleveland, and my city, the Rotten Apple, New York City. Thank you, the staff, and the three real kings of ROH, Sid, Carey, and you, Gabe. Thanks, homie, for give me a chance, and hopefully I did my job right, and now get some sleep, LOL. But foremost, the fans of ROH, even the ones that hates me and think I sucks, S-U-X, 'cause of ya, you just got me stronger. The fans made what ROH / Ring of Honor what it is today, and we all thank you. I will dearly miss when that Kill Bill intro comes out, when my right-hand man, Julie Smokes, hype me up and about to kill a motherfucker and drop his head with the cop killer, spelled with a K. Business is business, and for now, I'm an LAX, but I got to take care of that. But you never know what could happen. I might come back and raise some hell. But for now, this is my only send-off, and thank you, Ring of Honor and the fans. It is an honor to work and wrestle in front of real wrestling fans. From a icon, Notorious 187 / Homicide. Blah.
Honestly, despite all of the any grammatical errors, I thought that was really nice. That was very well. That was very well said. Yeah, it was very well said. Because it was Homicide, I would say.
It was a Homicide promo in text form, which I found was delightful to read. We'll go back to the Observer TNA section. Dave wrote at the time, Vince Russo has bring in Jimmy Rave, but there's no major movement in that direction. They aren't aware whether he has signed with ROH. He had.
So this was before the Rock and Rave infection.
Yeah. Okay. It is interesting that TNA was kind of going after, maybe without knowing that ROH was splitting away on pay-per-view and stuff. They were going after the Briscoes. They were going after Jimmy Rave. Those would have been, Jimmy Rave does end up going there. Briscoes would have been an interesting signing. So we're getting through this stuff, Matt, but another thing I want to mention is, so that's a big deal too. The idea that ROH wrestlers for the first time in their history are signing contracts. And I touched on it before. We'll go to, this is something the PW Torch wrote months after the contract started. Wade wrote, ROH is now offering healthcare insurance to their contracted wrestlers, although the level of coverage varies from wrestler to wrestler. So I was listening to an episode of Between the Sheets recently, great podcast, Dave Bixenspan, one of the hosts, been on the show. And they read something in the Observer that talked about the wrestlers having health insurance, and they were like, that can't be true. And those guys, they're very smart. They know their stuff. Smart. They know more. They are the proverbial people who have forgotten more about wrestling than I will ever know. I don't think they're right about this because Kerry Silkin has bragged on Last Stop Penn Station, his old podcast with Ian Riccoboni, how about we gave our wrestlers health insurance, like even WWE didn't do that. That was a very big point of pride for him. And Jimmy Rave talks about this on an honorable mention on his interview there with those guys, another friend of the show. And he talks about it, and he says a little wrinkle about that was when he got his contract, they didn't give him health care. And I don't know if they eventually gave him health care, and he had to go to them. He was like, well, why aren't you giving me health care? And they were like, well, we know you have a shoot job, a regular job, and we know you get health care insurance through that. And he was like, well, I just recently quit that job, so actually you should be giving me health insurance. And so when we talk about wrestlers getting health insurance, I have no idea, if everyone that was under contract got health insurance. That story, I just read seems to indicate, different guys got different levels of coverage. So it might have been like maybe some guys get very cursory health coverage or none at all, and maybe like the Danielsons and Nigels of the world get really good health insurance. Who knows? This was
that's I feel like shows like a failure of the wrestling media of that era. Like that's a big deal. That's a big story. Like these guys getting health insurance, signing to Ring of Honor. Like somebody should have investigated that and learned more details to figure that out, because that could have affected the whole industry if like more information was disseminated about it.
Yeah, and also to that point, this was a pre Obama and Obamacare. So this wasn't even a thing where like health insurance was kind of considered mandatory, and we'll subsidize it if you're really poor and all that stuff. It was in a way, health insurance was even more, getting coverage was even more of a big deal then. Like I heard so many American people and it still happens to a degree, but like people like, I hate my job, all this stuff, but I can't quit because the health insurance is decent. Like,
yeah, that's definitely still a factor for sure.
So I agree with you that like this was a bigger deal than maybe it just got very cursory mention. And the other thing I want to mention that Jimmy Rave talked about contracts that I thought was really interesting. He talked about this on Honorable Mention and maybe his shoot interviews that he's done elsewhere as well. But he mentioned he tells a story of when he got his contract, he sent it to a lawyer to look over, and his lawyer came back and said something to the effect of like, this contract doesn't guarantee anything. Like it says you can't go to TNA or WWE for the length of the contract, and it tells you that like you're going to get paid, wherever you work for ROH, this amount of money, but it guarantees no dates. Like it says, it doesn't say that ROH has any obligation to book you at all, and yet it's kind of committing to that. And so, Jimmy like tells ROH that, and I guess someone in the office, sounds like not Gabe, but someone else, I forget who it was, but it was like, why the hell are you showing this contract to a lawyer? Like getting mad at him for doing like a normal thing, and then apparently Gabe ended up talking to him, was like, look, it's not a guarantee of dates, but like, have I ever not booked you regularly? And Jimmy was like, Gabe was right. He hadn't. In fact, I think he said something like, ROH even paid me a couple times for shows I couldn't make. They still paid me. And so I trusted that and I signed the contract. And then we'll get into it when Jimmy Ray leaves, but not too long after he signs this contract, ROH like doesn't book him for a weekend. And so like his worst fear becomes realized. But I think that's another interesting thing. Again, something like, to your point, I would have loved them getting into more of the nitty gritty, like the reporters researching the contracts. Like it sounds like maybe not every wrestler got a contract. Like I would have, the same kind of contract. I would have loved to know, like, did Bryan Danielson or Nigel McGuinness get a guarantee, or did they also just get like a guarantee of dates and a price? Like I don't know, but that brings us to the Observer. And this is I swear, Matt, we'll get to the show soon. We're getting through it. There's just
this is less than 40% of the news about this.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some judicious. I tried pruning this, but I hope this all seems interesting and more. Because the one thing, this is the NWA thing, and I thought this touches on things you were talking about before. Dave wrote in the Observer, the official documents bringing up the 5-year relationship between the National Wrestling Alliance and TNA were signed on May 11th, and the angles to stop usage of the NWA heavyweight and tag team titles in the promotion took place on pay-per-view and on the ensuing TVs. As noted previously, NWA and President and attorney Bob Trobick claimed that TNA had breached its contract for the belts with the Alliance and told TNA he was taking the belts back, with both sides agreeing on the May 14th deadline. As things stand, the series of small independent promotions that make up the NWA, perhaps with one major promotion involved, will create new singles and tag team championships over the next few months. A 16-man singles tournament is tentatively scheduled to start on June 2nd and to end in early September, with the biggest names involved being Bryan Danielson, Brent Albright, Claudio Castagnoli, and Adam Pearce, all ROH wrestlers. Lesser-known independent wrestlers like Damian Wayne will fill out the tournament, which will be marketed nationally as Reclaiming the Glory, NWA World Title Tournament, on DVD distributed by Big Vision Entertainment, which will be a major partner in the attempt to market the NWA name. Even though Gabe Sapolsky told us that he didn't think Danielson would be winning the NWA title, since he is now signed to ROH and the NWA has given up its contract with Danielson to be touring champion, he is still the current pick. A somewhat uneasy alliance has been made between the two promotions, NWA and ROH, where Danielson would be able to defend his title on NWA shows provided they didn't conflict with ROH bookings. It is uncertain whether Danielson would be called NWA champion ROH. Before ROH got pay-per-view and signed wrestlers to contracts, the plan was for Danielson to be recognized as NWA champion on ROH shows, but with pay-per-view and contracts, the dynamic has changed. The new NWA is attempting to follow in the footsteps of ROH and run shows largely to provide content for a distribution deal with Big Vision Entertainment. Big Vision, the company that Kevin Kleinrock is a key component of, was behind the short-lived Wrestle Society X promotion. It should be noted that the ROH contracts specifically prohibit wrestlers from working for TNA, WWE, appearing on pay-per-view for another company, or wrestling on MTV, apparently as a safety valve in case something unexpected happens and Wrestling Society X is revived. They are allowed to appear on DVDs for other promotions and on other television, so kind of the opposite of what Dave said earlier. The NWA and Big Vision are in at least preliminary talks for what we consider a minor station available nationally on the Dish Network. The idea is to use the ROH promotion model of presenting high-quality matches for hardcore fans and to make money through DVD sales. The advantage they would have is the ability to get distribution in stores. Obviously, with no such restrictions due to using TNA talent, ROH is likely to try and expand more in that direction. Big Vision is also going to try and get a pay-per-view deal, video on demand, or digital pay-per-view deal. So yeah, it's a really weird thing where like, and not much of this comes to fruition. That like NWA is basically like, we would also like to be ROH. We would also like to do all this stuff, and now TNA all of a sudden being like, ROH being like, I don't know about this, but like Danielson doesn't become NWA champion. They do end up having Adam Pearce defend the AWA title in ROH in 2008. And
there's some big NWA title matches in ROH not long after this. So, I don't know if like the Daniels, like it could have been Danielson, it would have probably ended up being all right.
Yeah. And so quick, we got a couple lines from, a Torch talk that Wade Keller had with Gabe Sapolsky. Wade asks, how does this affect your relationship with TNA? The talent crossover has been eliminated already. Gabe writes or says, it's down to Homicide and Austin Aries. Really, at this time, I want to keep everything focused on Ring of Honor. So clearly, this interview must have happened like the day they announced the move to pay-per-view, because the day after or like a couple days later, TNA pulls the talent. Wade writes, so basically, that will be worked on behind the scenes. Otherwise, no comment. Gabe says, yeah, pretty much. Keller says, fair enough. It is nice at this stage that you moved to this stage that there isn't a lot of crossover, and it really isn't an issue. I doubt there will be talent exchanges. They'll see you more so as competition now that you're offering a very different type of, even though you're offering a very different type of pay-per-view product. Gabe says, it doesn't take a genius to see that we've been phasing down the TNA talent, and they've been phasing down on us using the TNA talent. It's been a mutual thing between us. You just have to look. First there was Abyss, then Shelley, then AJ. Jay Lethal was thrown in there, then Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels. You can see it was definitely something that we thought about for a year and a half or so. They wanted to do their own thing, and they've been doing theirs. It's been something we've been working on. We'll see how it plays out. Wade then asks, are you saying some of the talent decisions over the last 4, 5, 6 months, such as Samoa Joe, this might have been in the back of your mind to sort out and separate the two rosters? Gabe says, yeah, it was in the back of my mind even before all of this, just because we didn't want to have two identical rosters. Wade asks, are your wrestlers under contract, like legal binding real contracts? Gabe replies, this whole thing afforded us the opportunity to sign a roster of talent. We have well over 10 guys, which is a funny phrase. We have well over 10 signed at this point, and that's very exciting to me. I have been living the past 10 years of my life waiting for that instant message or email or phone call to come in saying so-and-so who's having a major angle needs to finish up, or he's gone, or any kind of situation like that. I don't have to live with that hanging over my head, and I don't have to book with that hanging over my head right now, because our core roster and all our main players will be signed for a period of time that will allow us to build around them.
You know what's ironic about that statement is that by all accounts, this whole thing with the pay-per-view made booking for Gabe much harder, not easier, despite the contract.
And Wade asks, are the contracts just a flat guarantee or a WWE type of downside? And Gabe replies, I don't want to get into the terms of the contract. Yeah. So I was just asking, to be fair, I just asked, the report should have gone into this more. To be fair, Wade does ask that, and Gabe instantly is
he asks once. Gabe says, I'm not going to tell you, and then that's like kind of like the end of it, right?
And so Gabe continues, the guys all seem very happy. One huge compliment, and this is probably the biggest compliment possible I've ever received, is that we started trying to sign guys a month ago. Everybody was very receptive to it. And not only were all the guys receptive to it, but they didn't try to run to WWE or TNA first chance they got. In ECW, it seemed like anytime someone got an contract offer, the first thing they do is run outside and try to go to WCW or WWE to counter the offer. The guys we have and the guys we've signed are really committed to being here. They want to build a system here, and they don't want to be part of those systems. As you know, Wade, a lot of wrestlers aren't happy with the systems in other places. This is a chance for guys to have their freedom and build their own system, and they're completely into it. It was such a huge compliment that everyone was just so willing to sign and so committed to this cause. The sense of team that we have in the locker room is unlike anything I've ever been a part of. We all really believe in what we're doing and what our cause is in ROH. I think that's really going to carry over into the ring and give us a really special product. So that's an interesting comment from Gabe. Matt, we are done with the notes, except a couple notes of the show.
We are done with the notes, except for a couple notes.
Yeah.
No, go on, because I was going to make a comment, but I'm going to wait till you're done.
Okay. ROH, Reborn Again, took place May 11th at the Connecticut Expo Center in Hartford, Connecticut, in front of a reported crowd of 450 fans. Of course, that name is evoking the ROH Reborn Stage 1, Stage 2 after the TNA pulled their talent the last time due to the Feinstein scandal. PW Torch wrote, ROH management is still in the process of establishing the new venue in Hartford, which is why they are continuing to run shows there despite low attendance. Management feels the new venue in Hartford is a great location and attribute low attendance to the frequent changes in venues, including one show last year that was held outside in the ring under a tent, that of course being the famous show that our friends at An Honorable Mention love to refer to as Kenta in a Tenta. ROH Booker Dave Sapolsky tells PW Torch he was pleased with the May 11th event in Hartford. Quote, I think our show in Hartford helped as we had a great outing and some really good matches. And there's one more thing I want to talk to first, but I think this is a good time for Matt, what you were going to say.
What I was going to say, because you were talking about the roster at ROH and like the changes. So this is something where with Homicide gone and like Julius Smokes appearing, it became really stark to me. And it's been true for a while, but like okay, so Jay Lethal wrestled on Fight of the Century in August 2006. Since then, I checked, and I'm almost positive there has not been a single black wrestler on an ROH show since that point, and there will not be another one until Ruckus comes in late August. That's pretty crazy, right? And like,
yeah.
and there are wrestlers of color, right? There's obviously like Homicide had been there, but now he's gone. But like Rocky Romero's there, obviously the Noah talent and Dragon Gate talent that have come in, but it's an extremely white roster. Like one of the most that I can think of in like the modern era of wrestling. It's kind of bizarre, and I remember thinking this at the time. Like this isn't something that I just thought of. Like at the time, I was like, that's really weird. Like how white, and especially like how the lack of black wrestlers, like, and with like even like the managers like Nana and Julius Smokes gone, it's like, wow. Like and I can't imagine that it was on purpose, but I feel like there needs to be some thought put into this, right? Like that's not good. That's not a good thing to have your shows be so ethnically homogenous. I mean, there are a lot of good talent out there, so I don't know. It just seems strange to me. The other thing, I wasn't what I was thinking of, but I should mention, I do not think that this show fits the Reborn name very well. Those original Reborn shows introduced a lot of like new talent and stuff, which this show did not really do, except I guess for like Bobby Fish. I don't know. So yeah, those are my two thoughts before we get into the show.
Matt, your last thought just gave me the perfect tee up for the last thing I want to talk to about before we get to the show, because this is something else Gabe posted on the Ring of Honor website between the last show and this one, and I think it you just hit on it perfectly, because I was going to ask what you thought about this, and Gabe wrote this on the Ring of Honor website at the time. As many of you know, I like to break ROH's history up into chapter points. I feel this is especially important for new fans. Obviously, the ROH shows are meant to be watched as a video series. However, With so many shows, I understand that a new fan might have trouble starting with the Era of Honor Begins and catching up. Therefore, if you are new to ROH, I suggest you begin with one of the chapter starting points. Of course, to get the most of ROH out of ROH, it would be best to start with the first show. If you want to be current, you might want to start with one of the recent chapter points. I do feel that it is extremely important that you start with a chapter point rather than a random show in the middle of the chapter. You wouldn't want to see Kill Bill Volume 2 without seeing Volume 1 first, or start a season of 24 in the middle. Anyway, here's how the chapters look now. So these are Gabe's chapter points, Matt. Chapter 1, Era of Honor Begins to the first anniversary show. Makes sense? First year of the company. Chapter 2, Expect the Unexpected to At Our Best. Kind of makes sense because At Our Best is like starts with, the fallout of is kind of the Feinstein scandal happens right before that show, but really, that's kind of like the end of an era in a way. Chapter 3, Reborn Stage 1 to Final Battle 2004. That one makes sense to me because it's Reborn Stage 1 is a really good starting point, and Final Battle 2004 ends the Joe title reign. Chapter 4, It All Begins to The Future Is Now. I guess that's the first 6 months of 2005. I guess it makes sense. Chapter 5, Death Before Dishonor 3 to Redemption. So Gabe puts just the Punk title reign as a separate little short story, which Summer Punk, that makes sense. Chapter 6, Punk the Final Chapter to Unscripted 2, which just feels like I've got to have another chapter. like I don't know if that really tells a concise. I'll say this, man. I don't think that's the chapter any ROH fan should start with. I don't think that block of shows.
I think the.
Although you do get Joe versus Kobashi.
Yeah, he probably wanted the Milestone series to be its own chapter, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Because you are absolutely right. Because Chapter 7 is the 4th anniversary show to the 100th show, which I think is in fact the Milestone series. So yeah. And then we get Chapter 8, Weekend of Champions Night 1 to Final Battle 2006, which is, again, this chapter feels a little bit more nebulous. It's just like, it's the rest of 2006, and Homicide wins at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Hell Freezes Over should have been the beginning of a chapter, and and Death Before Dishonor 4 should have been the end of a chapter.
And then Chapter 9 is dedicated to Good Times, Great Memories. So that's basically, I guess, the 5th Year Festival, the WrestleMania shows, a couple other shows on both ends. And then Chapter 10, Reborn Again to triple question mark. So to your point, I was going to ask you that, and you already made the point great. I don't think this is like if Gabe is really I'll let me just finish what Gabe says first, because Gabe finishes by saying the only chapter point I had a hard time debating is Chapter 1 to Chapter 2, as Chapter 1 could end with either Revenge on the Prophecy or First Anniversary Show. I recently decided that Expect the Unexpected makes a better Chapter 2 starting point than First Anniversary Show, since it marked the beginning of heel Punk versus Raven, Joe is #1 contender and about to win the belt, as well as the Prophecy losing the tag titles. Back then I didn't really have chapter points in mind. The rest of the chapter points are clearly defined in my mind, and the series was written and meant to be watched that way. Of course, unless you start at the birth of ROH, you are going to miss some great stuff. Anyway, I hope this helps. So first off, it's really interesting to me how seriously Gabe came to take this idea that you really should with a chapter point. But I was going to say, going to your point, Matt, if he really is taking these chapter point idea and you really should start with this so seriously, he really should have booked a different show than what he booked on this night, right?
Right, yeah.
I'm kind of shocked given all of what he's saying here.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into the details. But yeah, for sure, I don't think this would be a great place to start for any prospective ROH viewer. Same for Weekend of Champions Night 1. Same for Expect the Unexpected. There are plenty of chapter points that I don't think feel like a great starting point to me.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're really saying this as you should start at any one of these starting points, some of these DVDs would absolutely not be shows I'd recommend to a guy who's never watched Ring of Honor before, or a girl. Right. But we open with Rebecca Bayless backstage saying that tonight ROH is about to be reborn again when Bryan Danielson, making his first ROH appearance in 4.5 months of time, or in ThROH The Years podcasting time, 11 months between episodes, interrupts. Bryan asks, what kind of name is Reborn Again? What does that mean? Does that mean a change of the main event talent? Does that mean a change to the business ethics of Ring of Honor, an independently owned company? Does that mean everything's going to change now that ROH is on pay-per-view? Bryan doesn't think so, because he's back with a fully healed shoulder, more tricks up his sleeve and a bunch of new things to bring to ROH. Tonight he has an open contract, and he's going to prove that starting tonight, well, he was the best in the world for a year and a half. I thought it was like, this felt like a promo where Bryan almost didn't know what to say, because he goes, I'm back with more tricks up my sleeve and a bunch of new things. It's like, oh, wow, you're really specific. But
I will say this, and also what they do on the show, not the way I would have probably brought back Bryan Danielson.
Yeah. PW Torch wrote also made known Bryan Danielson is returning to ROH 1 month earlier than expected. So I guess they probably bumped him up, probably because his recovery was going well. He had just done that tour of Noah, and because the pay-per-view was getting taped the next night. But it's interesting that he was I guess on the books originally to miss like the first 5 months, not the first 4 months of the year. But we then get a video of Homicide making a past ring entrance as a Lenny Leonard voiceover tells us that in breaking news, ROH has sent shockwaves through the wrestling world with the announcement of them going to pay-per-view. Lenny adds that TNA Wrestling LLC has reacted to this announcement by exercising their option not to allow Ring of Honor to book TNA contracted talent, effective immediately. Lenny says this primarily affects Ring of Honor regulars Homicide and Austin Aries, and ROH would like to thank both for their contributions to the company. Lenny says pay-per-view has afforded ROH the opportunity to sign their own roster to contracts to avoid any conflict in the future. For the first time, Ring of Honor has a roster of contracted talent.
Finally, we could talk about what it means for these TNA wrestlers to have left ROH. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
It almost felt like them almost apologize, like basically saying, like stressing the contract thing to basically be like, look, this isn't going to happen again. Like TNA's not going to be able to pull talent a third time because we've done this. So if you're a longtime fan, this is it. We then had 2 dark matches. Bobby Dempsey and Rhett Tice defeated Alex Payne and Ernie Osiris. Mitch Franklin defeated a local wrestler, Nick Steele. And then we got a segment, Matt, that did not make the DVD, even though this DVD, I think, RH DVDs at this point could run significantly over 3 hours. They had the technology. This DVD, I think, only ran 2 hours and 50 minutes, and they still cut a segment, which was an opening segment apparently where Dave writes of the Observer, RH announced at the show that Nigel McGuinness couldn't wrestle due to a back injury. He was there. He was legitimately all banged up. Plus, the pay-per-view show was written with him as a key player, so they didn't want to risk him. BJ Whitmer asked to take his place as Takeshi Morishima's partner against Mark and Jay Briscoe. The Briscoes then jumped him, and Morishima made the save by giving both Briscoes backdrop drivers. And PW Torch added about Nigel McGuinness's injury that he had to miss the show due to the back injury suffered the previous weekend while wrestling in Europe. So, yeah, this whole I don't even think they mentioned Nigel having an injury on the DVD. They just, like, if you watch the DVD, you would just assume that Whitmer was always booked in the tag main event and Nigel just doesn't work the show for some reason.
Yeah, for sure. And, Nigel does work the next night, so.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just, again, like you said, they're just saving him. They don't want, the pay-per-view is so important to them, they don't want to jeopardize his health for a show in Hartford, Connecticut. And that brings us back, finally, to the opener. Jimmy Rave defeated Pele Primo via submission in 4 minutes, 51 seconds when he made him tap out to the heel hook. But first, no, just kidding, man. What did you think about this match?
It was a classic B-show opener. I thought there was a lot of energy. And, it was ultimately a dominant win for a star. Unlike in Minnesota, Jimmy Rave did not get a babyface reaction. And he certainly acts like a heel. He knocks Primo outside of the ring, attacks him there. Pele, he has his, he did his fun, but I would describe it as clunky spinning head scissors, which gets a nice reaction. I would say a lot of Pele's offense here was not smooth, but had a lot of energy. Rave sold his jaw a little bit, and maybe it wasn't selling, maybe it just hurt, I don't know. But he does some fun stuff. Chucks Primo military press style. He drops him stomach first on a turnbuckle hook that he exposes at one point. Pele gets a leaping drop kick off the apron in a good spot, I thought. He gets a couple other near falls. Pele, he got a lot of offense here, but it was short enough, and Rave's offense was dominant enough, that I would still describe it as a dominant win. The ending was Rave rolls through a Hurricane Rana attempt and just goes right into the heel hook, and Pele taps out immediately. But yeah, I thought Rave just did what he always does, but he looked good here. Primo is, still good at getting the crowd behind him. So this was I wouldn't call it like a good match, but it was a fine B-show opener for what it tried to do, which is just like a semi-squash match. I guess not a squash, just like a quick dominant win.
Yeah, this was Rave's third match back from the broken jaw, and while he hasn't yet repeated the amazing, super enthusiastic 100% babyface reaction he got on the night of his surprise return, he did get, I think, an interesting mixed reaction on this night. Like, he gets a "Let's Go Jimmy" chant before the match starts, and then a couple fans chant "Die Jimmy, die," and Jimmy actually asks those two fans, he goes, "I want to know, you're the only two fans chanting that." So he's actually pointing out, most people are cheering me. And then right after that, a few fans chant, "You still suck." But then at the end of the match, when Rave counters into the heel hook, it gets a big babyface pop for the crowd. So he was getting a very interesting part of some of these crowds seeing those we're still no, Jimmy Rave's still an ass. And some people were I actually like Jimmy Rave now. But Rave here doesn't seem to be working as a face. He's toned down the heelness just a tad. I would say his persona at this moment seems to be I'm incredibly grumpy and have a mean streak, and that's about it. Commentary is playing up that Jimmy's may have come back from his broken jaw too soon. Jimmy's grabbing, like you said, his jaw throughout the match. On paper, you look at the time of this match and you look at the result, you might assume it's a total squash for Jimmy. And like you said, I think Jimmy actually gave Pele more offense than he himself had in the match. Even the finish is Pele just hitting some moves and Rave just rolling through a Rana to get to the heel hook to get the win out of nowhere. I thought it was a pretty enjoyable, short little opener, but to me, what stands out were two spots. The first is early on, Pele gets caught up in the ropes and he's clinging to them, hanging upside down. And Jimmy just boots him high in the chest hard, and Pele just splats to the floor. And then later on, Pele does a running dropkick off the apron to Rave on the floor, and it looks like he catches Jimmy right in the side of the head. I did a frame by frame. It looks brutal. And I also appreciated there's a moment where Jimmy takes off, not the turnbuckle pad, but the pad over the metal that connects the turnbuckle to the ring post. And I thought, first I was what's he doing? And then he drops Pele's stomach first on that piece of metal, and then Pele falls off that and splats on the floor again, which I thought that was neat. But yeah, somewhat slight, perfectly enjoyable short opener. With those two notable bumps. But really, what the most notable part of this match for me, Matt, was there's that one point where Jimmy's on the floor and he looks directly into the ringside handheld cam and he proceeds to stick his tongue out way to the side of his cheek and then pull it back in. It is crazy. I think it has to be the image for the show. I have no idea why he did that. Was he just trying to find another way to salve the jaw? He sticks his tongue like a goddamn Jabba the Hutt. It is weird. But after the match, Jimmy gets a mix of applause, some cheers, some boos, and Jimmy does some goofy stomach crunches as he sits on the apron. Pele, meanwhile, says that his ankle is so hurt they can't put weight on it and needs help. Needs the ref and ROH staffers to help him to the back. Next, we join the No Remorse Corps of Roderick Strong, Davey Richards, and Rocky Romero backstage. Roddy says he told us that they were coming to ROH to take it over. Aries tried to start the Resilience, but that didn't work because he's out of here, pal. Rocky says he took care of Jack Evans when he knocked him out in Chicago. Roddy says he's the last original member of Generation Next standing. Davey Richards says Matt Cross and Eric Stevens, 1 down, 2 to go. Davey also says Hartford weird, says it Hart Ford with a weird emphasis on Ford, but that was my main takeaway from this promo.
The main takeaway that Davey Richards cannot pronounce Hartford.
Yeah, and that brings us to Daisy Hayes defeating Nikki Rocks via pinfall in 5 minutes, 1 second after hitting the Mind Trip. This is the second time we've seen Nikki Rocks on Through the Years. The previous time was she was in a 4-way at Black Friday Fallout. This will also be the last time we see her on Through the Years because she only wrestles one more match for ROH, and that's a TV match against Sarah Del Rey in 2009, and we are not making it to 2009. After 2008, we are out of here. 3 months after this match, we're covering she starts as the Voodoo Queen, Roxy Laveau for TNA, which begins about a year and a half run of her having consistent employment in TNA. This is your usual ROH women's match that it's low on the card, often here in second from the bottom, which is, as we've talked about before, the true lowest spot on the card because the opener has special significance. At one point in commentary during this match, Dave Prazak said, let me see here. He says, Lacey and Daisy Hayes have really been the women's side of Ring of Honor, which is also kind of true, but hilarious statement. Like, can a wrestling promotion have an entire side that is two people? I guess some
Yes.
shapes have a small sides, you know.
No, but also like in wrestling for many years, like that is like very common on like the women's division in a lot of these promotions. I mean, how many matches did like Medusa and Akira Hokuto have in WCW in like 96, 97, or like, three people maybe because Bull Nakano would
Yeah.
come in sometimes, right? Like, so like,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, it can be. It can be two people or three people. Yes.
Yeah, like when WWF too, like when Medusa was Alundra Blaze, it was like the women's division was basically
Her and one other person, yeah.
yeah, and whoever we're setting up to be, you know, her challenger. Yeah, exactly. So I felt like this women's match, I felt like the problem with these 5-minute matches for people that aren't established, unlike Raven Pelly, who had a 5-minute match on the previous match, but are both established in ROH, is that you're kind of forced into going at a crazy pace and doing just a bunch of moves to make an impression, which, sometimes that can be fun, but it's also very one note. And of course, though, there is the option to not do that. And you see that here. Like, they don't go a mile a minute. They burn off the opening minute or two just with like perfectly fine basic chain and mat wrestling, and then they start to ramp up, and there's normally nothing wrong with that, but you see like the flip side to not going we gotta force everything in because we got so little time route, because when you're a person in Rox's position here, or any ROH women's position really at this point in history, you have this problem where it almost feels like you're wasting time if you're not just doing big stuff every moment when you're getting so little time and your opportunities are so limited. Like, it almost feels like you're wasting your time to make a big impression in what's just a very rare opportunity for you. But then I say that, and in this match, when they do ramp up a bit into more exciting, flashier stuff, it's not great. Like, there are some okay spots that are also spots where they technically hit their moves, but boy, it seems touch and go. And there's one outright botch where Rox and Daisy are going for a spot where they do simultaneous kip-ups, and Rox botches her kip-up. RH picks a camera angle that mostly hides it, but you can still tell something has gone wrong. And what I hate about this moment wasn't really the botch. It's that after landing a move, Nikki went out of her way to go lie back down her back just so she could do the simultaneous kip up with Daisy. And it makes sense why Daisy would kip up, because she had just taken a move that had put her on the mat and she wanted to recover and get to her feet quickly. But Rox putting herself in that position was one of those real awkward, like, why are you do this except to have a synchronized moment that in kayfabe you shouldn't even be anticipating? Like, it was just, and on top of that, the fact that she did that and then botched the kip up, I was like, ooh, not good. But overall, I would say this was not a train wreck, but definitely not one of ROH's better women's matches. And there isn't like we have a huge pool of them to judge from. There is a moment where Nikki does a neck bridge, and the fans give this appreciative, like, ooh, kind of reaction. And it really tells you the era of women's wrestling we were in at this point, because it was like we were in an era where more and more U.S. crowds were being supportive of the idea that women were being presented as serious wrestlers. There were fewer fans doing the horny cat calls, but you also had fans that had like such a limited knowledge base when it comes to women's wrestling that at times they respond to women doing moves like a neck bridge, like they just saw a dog that learned how to close a door with its nose. Like, I don't think they're trying to be patronizing. I'm not mad at them. I think it's the fact that we're in this weird little pocket era of a generation of fans becoming more open to serious women's wrestling, but not having seen any. Like, I bet most of these fans weren't hoarding old All Japan Women and Gaia tapes at home. It reminds me of that live report we read a few shows ago where a fan said that a pretty standard but decent women's tag was the best women's match he had ever seen live. And we were like, well, I bet that probably was true, right? Because he probably hadn't seen a lot of women's wrestling live. And I think it's great now that U.S. fans actually grow up with serious women's wrestling to the point where they can almost take it for granted. And I feel for like this lost generation who had to be the transition point that educated some fans at what it could be, but they never got the opportunities to shine and develop on the big stages and grow like the next generation would. So, I had to add some melancholy to the podcast, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, at least you found something interesting to say about this match, because it definitely wasn't an interesting match. It was another one of those, like you said, like They get a few minutes, so they don't get a chance to do much. And so there's a few botches. They stick out because it was such a short match. The crowd was pretty forgiving of like the botch kip up spot. They didn't really give them a hard time about that. But it's sad when that happens in a match where you clearly the person is trying to impress, right?
Yeah.
And so every little mistake like that makes a big difference, especially like I just said in a short match. But yeah, I mean, I'd say there were moments early where Rox looked good, and then there were other moments where she looked sloppy. And beyond that, like no one really had a chance to do anything. Like it was just a cursory 5-minute match. So it's really not, I mean, like I said, I'm glad that you got something interesting to say out of it just in terms of like it's the era, but the match itself was not interesting. You know what I mean? Like there was just not much to it. Like obviously Hayes was going to win. Rox had some unfortunate moments. She certainly didn't look bad, but she didn't look particularly good. And we don't see much more of her in ROH.
Yeah. After the match, Sarah Del Rey comes to the ring, and she actually gets a good amount of chance. She takes the mic and patronizingly congrats Daisy on the match and her big win, patting her on the head. She calls her kiddo and then walks away. And I really love Daisy's reaction to this because she's completely not even angry. She's like perplexed and kind of exasperated. And she remarks like she's like, "Oh, I've already beaten you." And then she's walking down the aisle after because Del Rey's already left, and some fans like Sarah's gonna kill you, and she actually has like a short, like exasperated conversation with the fan, like I've beaten her, like she's like, why are you saying this? I thought that was kind of cute. So next we have El Generico and Kevin Steen defeating Eddie Edwards and Jason Blade in 10 minutes, 18 seconds when Generico pinned Blade after he and Steen hit the package pile driver brainbuster combo. This Jericho-Steen push continues here with a win over Edwards and Blade. Like that team had just beaten Hero and Toland, and now they put over Steen and Jericho. What'd you think, Matt? They got 10 minutes, so that's a decent amount of time.
This is one of the I found the more enjoyable matches on the show. Certainly wasn't dramatic, but I thought it was just like pure fun, pure entertainment. Great offense. I actually thought Blade looked better than he had in a while. Like, not like he was the standout by any means. I'm sure he was like probably the fourth most impressive person in the match. But, he'd had a lot of like matches where it's like, okay, things start out okay for him, but then he botches some stuff or the timing is a little off. And I don't think that happened in this match. He did a good job selling for Steen, who really took a lot of offense out on him. There was a good spot where he teased the dive and Edwards hit a surprise tope, stuff like that. But I actually thought that Edwards came on really strong here. It wouldn't be long before Eddie Edwards in a tag team match against Steen and Generico was like a big match. When he started with the American Wolves the year later with Davey Richards. But I thought considering how little he's been in ROH, what is this, his third match on an ROH main show maybe? I thought he came on pretty strong, like standing up to Steen as kind of like these were two fairly like big, powerful guys trading shots. I also thought his dive looked good. A bunch of good offense. I thought Steen was, as usual, the star of the match. He really got to show, do a great job just showing his personality with, just blind tagging himself in, being sneaky on the apron, grabbing Blade by the legs and pulling him out of the ring and slamming him in the guardrail so that they're able to take over the match. And also, you really get a little bit more of that dynamic with Steen and Generico, where Generico gets to be pure. He doesn't really get involved in any of the shady stuff that Steen is doing. He's very sportsmanlike at the beginning and the end. And just, does his offense. I think it's a fun dynamic, and Steen continues to be a breath of fresh air to the company. I think the surprising part, and actually, now that I mention it, probably, if you're going to say like a Reborn where like new wrestlers get to show off, I think Eddie Edwards did make a very good impression on this show. The way the match ended, we got, a couple of cool double teams where, Edwards knocks Steen off the apron, and Edwards and Blade do a super kick German suplex into a jackknife cradle double team combo for a near fall. And then eventually Generico just hits the Aluva kick onto Edwards, which knocks him out of the match. And then they hit the package pile driver brainbuster combo on Blade and get the win. Yeah, like I said, not a great match. It's only 10 minutes, but I think very effective for what they were going for.
Yeah, I probably didn't like this match quite as much as you, but I still liked it. I thought this was decent as a wrestling match, but like you, I thought it was pretty good as another introduction to the Generico Steen tag team dynamic. Like before the bell even sounds, I felt like they were really showing it in their behavior. Like Generico slapping hands with the entire front row, and Steen just immediately walks to the ring and he just stands there looking grumpy. And the contrast just continues like throughout the match. Like Generico's playing by the rules. If something goes into the ropes, he's breaking before a 5 count. And meanwhile, Steen is doing some cheat. It's like mild cheating, but he's doing some cheating. Generico's trading arm drags, and he's wrestling a little prettier. And when Steen tags in, he's like throwing heavy forearms and being a bit grittier. And even like when Steen tags out, you can see Generico takes like a half second to check on Kevin to see if he's all right, where the contrast were on the other end. At one point early on, Generico's in an arm bar, and Steen has no patience. He literally screams, "Come on, you're failing!" And the crowd actually starts laughing at that. Like just the story of this team is, what if the nicest, most polite guy was friends with an obnoxious asshole? And you might think that's not a realistic story, but I think this podcast is proof that it's possible, Matt. So,
hey, what are you trying to say? But actually, no. I mean, listen, you being nice and me being an asshole. Aside,
I knew you were going to do that.
Aside, I do think it's actually not an unusual dynamic in real life.
Yeah. It's interesting because I guess wrestling, how many times, like, has wrestling done that a lot? Because I guess the one they've done that I can think of is they did in the mid-90s in WCW the Sting Luger, where it was like Luger was an asshole to everybody but Sting, and Sting was just like, well, he's cool to me. And so Sting was, which I always thought kind of made Sting look like, because it wasn't like he wasn't aware that Luger was an asshole to other people. It was like, right. Well, he's good to me.
Yeah, no, I mean that was fun, like that short-lived dynamic that they had. Yeah, with Generico, it's more like he's just like naive and innocent, and not that he's just like letting Steen's evil slide. Just that more like he's a little bit dim, I guess, would be as a character.
His goofiness sells it exactly.
Right.
So I thought as a match that a lot of this was very generic, no pun intended, almost a throwback to the first ROH run of Steen and Generico, where they and a lot of guys on ROH undercards were asked not to go nuts and burn out the crowd before the top matches. Like Steen's little sides to the crowd, they draw laughs. His signature spots, like the big forward flipping leg drop, get nice reactions. So like I agree with you, he was kind of the highlight of the match. But then the final match, they do up the action, and in particular, there's this great tope Eddie Edwards does where he goes through the ropes at an angle onto Generico on the floor, where the camera feels like it's so close, the handheld ringside cam, that it feels like Edwards is inches from hitting the cameraman, and yet the cameraman swivels mid-move and catches the entire trajectory of the tope going over him. Like it's great. It's we don't get to praise the camera work in Ring of Honor too often. That was great camera work. And then Steen and Generico, when they wrapped things up in the ring, the crowd got pretty hot, and I thought those are two guys with enough cool enough moves who are also still very fresh to this crowd that you could work a match in second gear, turn on for the final couple minutes, and still leave that lasting final impression that they're two awesome dudes. And I thought that's like what they did here. I thought this was like a somewhat above average, par for the course, as a fun little B-show undercard tag match. But that brings us to Claudio Castagnoli defeating Bobby Fish via pinfall in 8 minutes, 18 seconds after hitting the Les Artes lift. Sean Radican, who was there live and also wrote a review of the DVD later on for PW Torch, wrote in his DVD review, he wrote, "This match seemed to be edited from what I saw live," which again is interesting because once again, Matt, this show had time to fill. They could have put more on this DVD, so I wonder if something went wrong or something, why they edited this match.
He could have just remembered wrong.
Yeah, you know what, Matt? Sean Radican could be fallible. You know what? I don't often consider that. You are absolutely correct, sir. Dave Prazak on commentary calls this the first time ROH is getting a chance to look at Bobby Fish, which is I would say is true if you use a very narrow criteria,
Yes.
because Fish actually worked 3 matches in Ring of Honor before this, 2 pre-shows, and he had 1 main show loss to Trent Acid all the way back in 2005 at All-Star Extravaganza 2. But he wrestled all those matches as, the name I love to say, Jerk Jackson. So, yes, technically, this is the first time ROH is seeing Bobby Fish as Bobby Fish, but the human being who embodies Bobby Fish, they'd seen him before.
Embody Fish.
That's a good one.
I don't know what the hell I'm saying.
That's the first good thing has been said on the show. But they'd use Bobby again on Final Battle this year, and then they'd use him 1 time in 2008, 3 times in 2009, and then he returns again in late 2012 when he finally becomes a regular. So kind of a long path for him to finally grab a hold in this company. It is really weird going back seeing Bobby Fish with no mustache and long hair. Like, I'm just so used to his modern look.
Also, he was still like beefier back then. He looked more like a muscle man.
But weirder still, Matt, I would say, is Claudio's look in this match, because he is in this weird transition point on his path to baldness. Like, he no longer has long hair. It doesn't go past the neck, but he's kind of grown out what he does have, so it's kind of curly on top. And between that hair and the suit he was wearing for his entrance, he had some real, like, I don't know about you, like Connor O'Malley vibes, like that kind of, my hair's starting to thin and it's really curly and kind of
I thought he was definitely like handsomer than Connor O'Malley. No offense to Connor O'Malley.
Hey, Connor O'Malley, if you're listening, I am sorry. You know what? Maybe Matt is the asshole on this show, but
I think Connor O'Malley is one of the funniest people living right now, but I don't think he cultivates the handsome thing necessarily.
Hey, he's got 80 Bryant. He must be doing something right.
I didn't say that he was an ugly guy. I don't think this is like I think that Claudio looked particular. I think he looked good like this, is what I'm trying to say. I thought that was what I took away from that look, that change in his look. I was like, oh, like this is a good look for him. Like that's not. I'm not trying to throw shade on Connor O'Malley, but this was like this guy looked handsome, is what I'm saying. Claudio looked handsome here. That's all I'm saying. He looked more handsome than he did with the long hair, I would say.
I love that we got to. I never would have guessed in a million years that we've gone to a row in the show where you. I'm not saying that Connor O'Malley is not handsome. I put you in a position to say that, but if this match was my first exposure to Bobby Fish, I'd kind of away from it thinking like, okay, I know he's a safe hand, and I know nothing else about him, because like he does a lot of more basic offense in this match. But it's all executed pretty well, with the only moves that really stand out are like he does a forward flip senton over the top rope to the floor, and a move that I would describe as basically a pounce, but with a jumping knee rather than like a spear.
That's kind of what Prazak described it as, yeah.
He literally does it's a pounce, and I described it as like it looks half neat and half ugly. Fish in this match, he showed no personality. He didn't stand out in any way stylistically. In this match, he is a shortish white guy in basic trunks with long hair and a good body who seems to have a solid grasp of the fundamentals. He would have fit in great in the Matt Striker, John Walters era of ROH, although, quite frankly, I think those guys showed more personality than Fish did, which, granted, it's unfair to judge Fish on one isolated match, but I would call this like a strong average to maybe slightly above average workman, like 8-minute semi tryout for a new guy. Claudio does one great feat of strength, like where Bobby goes for this leapfrog, and Claudio catches him in midair and tilt-a-whirls him into a backbreaker without letting Bobby's feet ever touch the canvas. He's like, I'm grabbing you and I'm going to tilt-a-whirl you like just out of like a deadlift. It was really cool. But otherwise, I think you can file this under perfectly acceptable, perfectly forgettable. The standout moments for me were on commentary, where Prazak informs us that Claudio is now calling his bicycle kick Swiss Schwinn music. And there's also a moment where Prazak makes a joke about Claudio's tights look like Tetris. And I have never related to Dave Prazak more, because you can tell he's starting the thing hoping that he'll find some humor, and he doesn't. And there's this awkwardness. And Lenny Leonard goes, well, they can't all be funny. And I just felt like I've never related to Dave Prazak more, because that happens to me all the fucking time here. So, Matt, what do you think about it? It does not.
I laugh at your jokes, Trevor.
No. I meant more in life. It only happens a couple times. To be fair, I think I've done it to you once or twice too. So, but there's definitely that thing where you start saying something because you're like, I'm going to figure out a joke for this by the end of the sentence. And then by the end, you're like, oh no, I can't find anything to grab here. Like I'm floundering.
Tetris. Oh, Tetris always a mind for comedy gold. The shapes of Tetris are very, very funny. Yeah, it made me miss the old days where we had a lot of content based on funny things that were said on
Yeah,
commentary. Not intentionally funny things. We really don't get that content at all anymore. Almost never. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I thought that you're right about Fish not showing any personality. I think his offense looked good enough that I could have seen them booking him more than they did in this era. Like he definitely was a good hand, like you said. But yeah, my main takeaway was Claudio looked nice. I actually thought it made him look younger too than he did. Like I thought he looked like a young guy, which he was obviously at the time. And I don't think he'd always showed that with his like greasy ponytail. So and I guess he does have the short hair for a couple of years there. He doesn't really do the bald thing until 2009, I don't think. So, well, I'll get to enjoy this Claudio look that I clearly like more than you. It's fine.
I said it looked like Conor O'Malley, and that's not the devastating criticism that Matt Feuerstein would think it is. So, for me,
so if someone said, okay, so listen, if someone said you look like Conor O'Malley, you'd be like, oh my God, thank you so much. That what your reaction would be?
Matt, don't push me in this corner, Matt. I'll attack you. You put me in the corner.
Okay.
I'll get desperate. Don't do this to me.
Okay, just asking. Just asking.
Look,
but anyway,
Matt, a lot of looks would be an upgrade for me. Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course. Whatever you say. But anyway, I enjoyed Claudio doing a variety of European uppercuts, including one in the corner where he rolls on the mat before popping up and hitting it. I enjoyed that. I also, I thought that there was a good spot where Fish did a pretty nice Saito suplex, and then he backdropped Claudio all the way to the floor and hit a somersault senton over the top rope. At that point, we actually got a Bobby Fish chant, so he definitely made an impression on some of the audience members. The lesser test lift is a very cool finish. Clearly, he didn't stick with it for very long because I didn't really remember it, but I do like that move a lot. And yeah, I thought the fact that the Fish got the crowd chanting for him in post match, I think he did leave a better impression than you're giving him credit for here. It wasn't a particularly good match, but mainly because of the length. But I thought that just as like an undercard Ring of Honor match, I thought they did pretty well.
I don't think he did bad, but I will say I do think part of the reason the crowd chanted Fish was they quickly discovered mid-match the novelty of just chanting the word Fish over and over again.
I don't know, Trevor, but okay.
But a lot of disagreement on this episode. This is going to be the last episode. This is all the famous friction we're known for.
Our biggest fight over whether Conor O'Malley is a 6 or an 8.
I wouldn't even say an 8. Well, you know what? You're pushing me in that corner. Don't push me in that corner.
We'll say a 7. How about that? We'll agree on a 7.
Next, we have the return of Bryan Danielson, who comes to the ring to Final Countdown wearing his evil Sith robe, fully covering him, including his face, until he finally gets in the ring and takes off the robe to reveal it's not Bryan Danielson, it's Shane Hagedorn. Immediately, a laughing Adam Pearce comes out with a mic, calling the crowd the biggest bunch of idiots he's ever seen. If all these half-wits are here, who's at McDonald's cooking his fries? Pearce congratulates Hagedorn, talks about how tomorrow ROH will tape its first pay-per-view, and as a special treat for the fans tonight in Hartford, they're giving away 2 general admission tickets to the pay-per-view taped under one of the fans' chairs. Pearce asks the fans to check. Pearce then calls out one kid who was checking, calling him the stupidest little brat in Hartford, saying that they wouldn't give them anything for free. He points out a fan wearing a sports jersey with the number 54 on its chest, saying that's how many men that fan has slept with. Pearce then says since Danielson has an open contract tonight, they're going to give him one of the greatest dream matches in the history of wrestling, the American Dragon Bryan Danielson versus Shane Hagedorn.
Should we keep like a homophobic joke tracker like we did the man and woman violence? Because it seems like somebody has to get one in on every episode or every show at this point.
I feel like they're getting less frequent, but yeah, that was definitely one. Shane stands shocked, that Pierce is booking him against Danielson. His mouth is agape as the real Bryan Danielson comes out from the back, and we get Bryan Danielson defeating Shane Hagedorn via submission in 4 minutes 11 seconds when he made him tap out to an armbar using the legs. This was very slight. Shane is very good at playing the guy who is both terrified, but then also immediately cocky if the slightest thing goes right for him. I really enjoyed how, like, to start the match, he lands a couple punches, and each time he lands a punch, he doesn't just immediately run away from Bryan. He, like, runs away in such a panic that he, like, stumbles and falls down, like he just saw the Terminator coming towards him in a hallway. But then after that, like, not much happens here. Bryan no-sells a European uppercut. He hits a few moves. On commentary, Dave Prazak wonders if Shane is wearing shoulder tape to mock Bryan's return from a shoulder injury, to which I would say no, because Shane was in fact working with a shoulder injury here, and he had his shoulder taped up shows earlier. But then Lenny says something that made me laugh. Lenny goes, I think he just likes to put tape on his shoulder. I thought that was funny because he could have sold it as he could have joined in with praising like, yeah, he's mocking Bryan, or he could have said, oh, I think he's really hurt. I love that Lenny found a third way. He just go, I think he just likes tape. He's Marge Simpson. He just thinks it's neat. But anyway, just a squash for Bryan. I did like the end where Shane goes for a single leg takedown, and Bryan just stuffs the takedown and does almost like a gut wrench suplex from that position, but like from Shane being like so low that on his legs that he had to like really grab him deep. I thought that was cool, but overall, very slight, I would say. What did you think?
I would say it is very slight, but also I think probably of all the stuff Bryan did in every hit performance in this entire night, probably this got some of his most fun stuff, because this match was about him and everything else kind of wasn't. So in that sense, but like I said earlier, this is not how I would have brought Bryan Danielson back necessarily. The way he's brought back on the following night, I think was better. The one thing I will say, and I know you haven't talked about the Pierce quote unquote match yet, but it is interesting that he gave Shane Hagedorn a lot more offense than he gave Adam Pierce.
Yeah, it's crazy because that's a great point, because like immediately after the match, Pierce jumps in the ring. He attacks Danielson, and rather than try and break up the fight, the ref treats it like a second impromptu match, as the announcers even point out this shouldn't be going on, as the ref counts like a near fall for a Pierce top rope leg drop. And Bryan makes a quick comeback, and he just applies a quick leg lock and wins. So we get Bryan Danielson defeats Adam Pierce via submission in 1 minute 13 seconds when he made him tap out to a leg lock. And like to your point, I was thinking it's interesting that they gave granted part of it, a lot of it was stalling, but Hagedorn still lasted in the ring like 4 times as long almost as Adam Pierce does, which I thought was
and actually got some offense in, unlike Pierce.
Yeah, but to another thing you said earlier, kind of touching on, like this show was promoted. One of the things they promoted was, Bryan Danielson's first match back, in ROH in 4 months plus, and he's going to be facing a mystery opponent. And imagine how you would feel if you were there live, and his mystery opponent is Shane Hagedorn. Adam, no offense to Shane, Adam Pierce, no offense to Adam, and then like we'll get to like kind of a background player in a 6-man tag. like I guess bizarre. You're kind of happy that. Yeah, but that you got to see him at all. But so after the match, the crowd chants "Best in the World" before the No Remorse Corps of Roderick Strong, Davey Richards, and Rocky Romero come to the ring. Rocky introduces Danielson to the No Remorse Corps.
The No Rapport Corps.
And says no matter how many times Bryan's beaten Roddy, Roddy's always taken him to the limit, and he respects him. He asks Bryan, would he like to join the Corps? He also points out that you're either with the Corps or you're against them. The crowd chants, just say no. So remember when just say no, Matt, was like a slogan because of drugs? And people don't say just say no anymore. They just say no.
So you're telling me that Nancy Reagan even had an impact in Canada?
I remember just say no. And Matt, we got a lot of American culture. We got, this is your brain on drugs. Your country was making sure to educate me that my brain is a lot like an egg that gets scratched. Was it Rachel Lee Cook who broke the egg? I forget.
Well, that's why you still talk about your brain so negatively, because you just think it's an egg.
I hate eggs.
You're an anti-egg guy.
I'm not quite Jason Mantzoukas, who has a very good reason to not hate eggs. But great on Taskmaster, by the way. But anyway, I will say I love that as Roddy tells Bryan not to listen to the fans where they're saying just say no, you can hear Rocky Romero say, they think they've got tickets under their seats. Like, I love that he's referencing what just happened. He's like, they're so stupid. They just, like, even, like, he's picking up what Adam Pearce started. And,
Lenny Leonard keeps going back to that too. Like, he was making fun of the fans for thinking that they I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows how many people actually even looked? Like, you couldn't really tell on the camera. So Leonard is making fun of these people. They could have been like one guy who looked under his seat.
It is interesting, too, because you would normally think, well, what would be a big deal if Ring of Honor did give away 2 tickets? But then you realize those New York shows during this era for Ring of Honor was like the one time in Ring of Honor history where like that actually was like shows that would sell out in advance. So
Oh yeah, and I'm trying to remember. Like, could you really not get a ticket to those shows the day before? I mean, I'd usually buy my tickets in advance or always, so I never knew. I never knew, but it feels like you probably could have gotten a ticket. But who knows?
Yeah, you could probably have squeezed in or gotten something. You know, they would have ignored fire safety regulations.
Like general admission ticket or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Bryan says, as enticing as Roddy's offer sounds, he has never sold out in his life. Just you wait, Bryan. And if he has to choose between being with Roddy or against him, he's against him. At this point, Eric Stevens and Matt Cross run in as the No Remorse Corps run to the floor. Bryan says, now that the odds are even, the Corps runs away like cowards. Bryan says he's not with Stevens and Cross, but he'll gladly fight beside them if the No Remorse Corps want to go 3-on-3 right now. Roddy says, as enticing as that offer may be, they just have to say no. Just say no. Cross then proceeds to dive over the top rope onto them. Stevens and Danielson also attack. We have a second straight impromptu match. This one seemingly against one team's will, which is like a very un-ROH thing. Like the wrestlers booking the match and like with one team clearly not wanting to have the match. But either way, it happens. And the No Remorse Corps are glad it did, because the No Remorse Corps of Davey Richards, Rocky Romero, and Roderick Strong defeated Bryan Danielson and the Brazilians of Eric Stevens and Matt Cross in 19 minutes, 27 seconds when Richards pinned Cross after he hit the DR driver. Brian Alvarez wrote on the Figure 4 Weekly, Aries Group has not been given a new leader, and the hope is that TNA will give Aries his release. He's asked before and turned down, and that he'll be back. So yeah, that's kind of part of the story of this too, with Brian being like, I'll team with you guys, but I'm not your leader. Like one of the many things that hurt like faction warfare, I guess, is ROH just now put themselves in this weird nether zone where they're assuming Aries could probably come back, but they're not 100% sure. So they have to do weird things like this, I guess. But Matt, what'd you think about this match? A lot of time, a lot of good wrestlers, but what'd you think?
Well, I know what you thought based on that.
I don't hate this match, but
Yeah.
I have thoughts.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like the way they brought Danielson back here, it almost felt like they were trying to make super clear, like this guy's a babyface now. Like, by positioning him against heels, he'd rather be against Strong than with him. He teams up with the Brazilians. But if you keep watching, which we will, he's not a clear babyface at this point. Like he is still like in that like in between zone. There are some shows where he's a babyface, some shows where he's a heel. So I thought it was interesting to have him go full babyface here. It doesn't like I would say he doesn't really go full babyface until like the 6th anniversary show, and he doesn't really get consistently babyface-esque until his feud with Morishima. So just kind of a weird way to bring him back. And the weirdest part about it all is, like, in this match, man, he barely does anything. Like, he's in a little bit. He does a couple, like, he does a nice, like, catch of Rocky Romero's kicks and turns it into, like, an ankle lock or a leg submission, rather. He does do an omoplata late in the match, like, or maybe that's actually was in a previous match. He does a couple things, is what I'm trying to say. But he's really like a huge background player in this match. Like he maybe does like 3 spots in like a pretty long match. It's all about the No Remorse Corps attacking Stevens and especially Cross, right? Cross is the guy that takes the most offense in the match. There's they really beat him up on the floor. There's a spot where Richards hits Cross with a running boot that sends him over the guardrail and then sends him into a big Romero kick, and then they suplex him on the floor. And they work over Cross's back. Strong does a pretty nice power display with 2 backbreakers right into a fallaway slam on him. Just a lot of A lot of good stuff. And the baby faces, I think, work pretty smartly here. They continue to try to get in the ring and stop the No Remorse Corps' beat down, but they keep getting pushed out of the ring. I will say this, whatever you think of the match, I do think it made the No Remorse Corps seem like a pretty good unit. They do a lot of, quick tags. They felt like they were over here, especially Strong. The crowd really liked getting on Strong with the Roderick chants. I think I've said this before. I think people underrate how effective the No Remorse Corps was as a heel unit. I think they come off pretty well, and their wrestling is good. Um, once Cross does a hot tag to Stevens, I think Stevens does a good job. There's he hits Strong with this total flipping German suplex, where Strong lands all the way on his stomach. TKOs Romero onto Richards. I think Cross, which is a pet peeve of mine, recovers a little too fast, hits a space flying tiger drop, but it's all right. It is funny that there's a spot where Cross gets back in the match before Danielson does. I kept waiting for Danielson to do something, and he just didn't. Cross does do a nice counter to the Gibson driver into Arana. I like that. It's a good spot. There was another good spot where Richards hits Cross with a bridging German suplex, but Danielson does a diving headbutt right onto the bridge. I thought that was a fun way to break up the hold. The other spot that I thought was maybe kind of stretched credibility even by the standards of wrestling at the time was Richards hits a tombstone on Cross, gets a 2 count, and then goes right into the Kimura lock. And Danielson tries to save, but Strong gets a Boston Crab on him, and Romero gets an ankle lock on Stevens. And my problem with it was Cross was in that Kimura lock for such a long time, and it just didn't feel like Cross would be somebody who would last that long on that hold that Richards wins with sometimes. So after all that, Cross gets to the bottom rope. I actually thought that Kimura could have been the finish, but they do a few more spots, and eventually Romero kicks Cross from the outside and goes right into the DR driver from Richards for the clean pin on Cross. I was actually genuinely surprised that Danielson lost his first big match back. A lot of weird booking for Danielson, honestly.
Yeah.
I did like the fast-paced final sequence a little bit, but I actually think it was a little more awkward than you usually get in these big matches. I think actually the best part of the match was the part where the No Remorse Corps was getting the heat on Matt Cross. I thought that was actually really fun and well done. I don't think that the ending, big move sequence really lived up to what it could have. So I think that took the match down a little bit. So in the end, I thought this was a good match, but not really much more than that. And the Danielson stuff I thought was really weird.
Yeah, you talking about the Danielson stuff about him losing his first match back. That made me think. I wonder if that's why they did the stuff with Hagedorn and Pierce to be well, if he's going to play such a background note in a losing effort in his comeback, we gotta give him something spotlighty and win technically 2 wins before we get to that.
Yeah,
I'm
sure that's what it was. Yeah.
So yeah, I thought this was a good 6-man, a real strong 3 1/4 star, maybe 3.5. But yeah, Danielson, completely agree on the fact that Danielson is not in this match that surprisingly much at all, not as much as you'd hope for, certainly. He really lets Cross and Stevens have the lion's share here with Cross, like you said, is the face in peril for a long time. Stevens is the one that gets the hot tag. And even after that, I think, Danielson does a couple of things, but I thought his one big eye-catching spot was the one you talked about where he does the top rope headbutt to break up Davey Richards doing a bridging pin with a suplex, which I thought was awesome. But there were a couple times in this match where things very briefly got a tiny bit chaotic, and I wish we had a lot more of those because they were fun. I liked a point where the match devolved back into all 6 guys brawling on the floor like the start of the match, and also that being how the No Remorse Corps actually gained control, where they actually ended up taking them all out on the floor one by one. And then I did not like the Matt Cross face and peril sequence as much as you. I thought it was fairly long and fine. Lots of quick tags. I thought Rocky hit one of the more impactful 619s you'll ever see. I like that Roddy does the cattle mutilation to Matt Cross and teases the surfboard, and instead he just kicks Cross in the balls. I think one minor issue that I have is so far on this ROH run from Cross, is I just want a little more personality from him. Like, he always has that incredible athleticism. Things like the space flying tire drop will always be crowd pleasers. But even as Face in Peril, I want him to stir my sympathy a little bit more. He tries to emote. He's not quite connecting on me on like a deeper level. Grant, he hasn't been gotten a lot of great opportunities yet, but even what I'm seeing, I'm like, I just want a little bit more from that respect from you. Stevens got the hot tag. It was a good hot tag. I thought Stevens looked very good on the whole in this match. I thought Davey Richards looked pretty on point too tonight. I thought I probably liked the final 6 or 7 minutes more than you. I thought once the hot tag started, I thought that was very good. And to me, that elevated the match to something that was a bit more the oversight that was feeling a little more pedestrian to me, I guess I'd say. And I kind of disagree with you on the triple submission spot because I actually like that spot because normally when you see like, three, like a triple submission, it's just kind of a spot to get the pop for, isn't this wacky? We're doing 3 simultaneous submissions, and they let go of it almost immediately. I like that they stayed in those submissions and really made those guys struggle for a while and get to the ropes. And I get what you're saying with Davey, maybe Cross shouldn't have been able to held out in the Chimera for that long. But to be fair, I don't think Davey was winning that many matches in ROH so far with the Chimera. He was winning more stuff with the DR driver. The end, though, I thought was weird. I don't know if you noticed this, but so Cross hits Davey with a great-looking reverse Rana, and at that point, the two of them start having a loud conversation. Like, then Cross looks to the ropes, he looks back, they keep talking, and then Romero jumps to the apron, at which time Cross, who hasn't taken a move, now stumbles out of nowhere back into the ropes like he's out on his feet, just so Rocky can hit him from the apron with the kick to the head, so Cross can then stumble back into Davey and get the DR driver for the win. It really felt like they were waiting for Rocky, and Rocky was not on time for the planned finish. But even apart from that, the execution of that was fairly ugly. I felt pretty awkward, but yeah, again, good match. Weird. I completely agree. Weird treat for Daniels. And I also agree with you. The No Remorse Corps has been very good. Like they are a real good, real solid mid-card heel stable. And I feel like it's kind of sad that, when people talk about, faction warfare, and they kind of sneer at it nowadays in hindsight, like, I feel like the No Remorse Corps kind of gets dragged into that when they don't deserve that, because at least from this early stage, they are just a very well-constructed, like, enjoyable group. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not the problem here. They're holding up their end of the faction warfare. Let me just go to my point because I scrolled away. Okay, then it is intermission. And Rebecca Bayless, it's intermission time. Rebecca Bayless is backstage with Jimmy Rave. Jimmy says he hadn't forgotten Pele beating him last October, and tonight he made an example of him. Tonight was the beginning of Jimmy taking what he wants. Jimmy hasn't really found a good character here. Like, it feels like, I don't know. He's in search of, he needs something here. He needs a non-type figure. I think I'm a Jimmy Rave fan, but it's just very generic and bland right now. But
I still think they should have tried turning him babyface and just seen what happened. To me, that would have been the move.
Would have been interesting, a different twist. But then we get Tank Tolan scored to the ring by Bobby Dempsey, defeating Mitch Franklin via pinfall in 4 minutes, 11 seconds after he hit the one-arm spine buster. This is Bobby Dempsey's official debut as Tank Tolan's whipping boy, and Tank's ROH act continues to be a lot of fun. He's having Dempsey work with resistance bands outside the ring as he watches Tank wrestle. And at one point, I think like less than 3 minutes in, he asked Tank if he can have a water break. Tank's like, no! And not long after that, Bobby, the camera just points to him, and Bobby's like completely exhausted. And, it's a very cheap, easy humor, but it worked. It's funny. They play their roles well. It's funny stuff, and not everything has to be high art or deep with meaning. This is a squash. Tank does a bunch of power / fitness themed moves. Stuff we've seen from him before already on this short ROH run. Like he does the jumping jacks on his opponent, the one-handed push-ups while he pins an opponent. But he also pulls out some like new, legitimately impressive stuff here. Like he does squats as he holds a delayed vertical suplex, which to me, I've seen guys do that since. That's always really impressive to me when you can hold like a steady delayed vertical suplex and do squats. Like I don't know how tough that is for someone that's really strong, but for someone that will never do that in his life, Matt, it impresses the hell out of me. And yeah, I thought this was just a simple, fun gimmick done really well. Like to me, this was, as sad as it is to say, one of the more fun parts of the show thus far. And then before I get to the aftermath, what did you think of the match?
Yeah, and it was just, character work. That's what it was. It wasn't really a match. He did some moves and he showed off his character. But I will say, as far as like wrestling moves, Tolan did this one arm. So actually, no, it was a splash mountain type of drop where he picked him up in like a razor's edge position, and then he just like dumped Franklin on his head. Like that was insane. Like I can't believe that Franklin got up from that. It was really insane. But yeah, other than that, yeah, the entertaining stuff was like Bobby having to exercise during the whole match at ringside. It just made me think like what? Like they don't exercise like the rest of the time. He just makes him do it while he's wrestling. Like, and he like does, he has like the bands and stuff. Like, yeah. It was funny. Like you said, cheap and maybe like, not politically correct, right? Like it's, there's like obviously the body shaming element, which like is, it's certainly problematic. But if you, I guess, can get that out of your heads, like there is a funny dynamic going on with this like big, like swole, like steroid looking guy trying to get this other guy into quote unquote shape by having him do absurd things at absurd times. Like there is something humorous to that. And yeah, the gimmick works. Like I do feel like it's, still kind of like a WWE-esque gimmick, but I guess, there's also the like disparity between what you'd expect in ROH and him doing the WWE style gimmick. The contrast makes it effective in ROH too. It's one of those things where it can't go very far, but if this is the spot it's in, it's usually going to be entertaining.
Yeah, if there's room for any of it, it's in like this small little pocket here. And I do think one thing that tempers the Bobby stuff a little bit is the fact that it's kind of a fun twist. And I don't know if it lasts forever. I don't remember, but like that, yes, Tank's being abusive and bullying and body shaming Bobby and like mocking him for being fat. But he also, at least in this early stage, is genuinely wants him to lose weight. like he wants to help him in his weird way, like as an ego boost for himself to prove that he can do it. But it's like he wants him to work out. Like it's a weird thing. Like it's not just the heel being like, you're a fat piece of crap and I hate you. It's like, I'm going to get you in shape. You're going to look great. It's an interesting twist. After the match, Tank sets Franklin in the corner and he orders Dempsey to cannonball him. And after a brief hesitation, Tank pulls down Bobby's top, revealing Bobby's man boobs. And then Bobby hits the move. And I like that too. It was like a weird twist because it was like, oh, he's humiliating him. But Bobby reacted to it almost like it pumped him up. Like, I don't know, to the point where I was like, was that supposed to humiliate him? Because it was like, he pulls down his top and then Bobby's like, okay, I'm going to do it. It was just a weird moment, but, interesting at least. We then return backstage where Delirious cuts a promo in Delirious Ease. I think he says at one point that Kenta knows Taekwondo, and Delirious also says he takes a lot of Ativan but never goes to sleep. So your classic Delirious promo.
I would say a higher percent of this is intelligible than usual.
Yeah, definitely on these longer promos, he will let a little more English creep in, so to not completely leave you bored or drifting. And that brings us to Naomichi Marufuji defeated Matt Sydal via pinfall in 15 minutes flat after hitting the Shiranui. Matt, we haven't seen Marufuji in a while, and we haven't seen Matt Sydal in a second either. And here they are, third from the top. What'd you think about it?
So, like you said, we hadn't seen either of them in a while, and it felt like this match could have been more than it was. Like, I felt like this match felt low stakes in a way that I wouldn't expect it, given how much Sydal has been featured in ROH before he took his little, sojourn away from the company for a little bit to go to Dragon Gate. I feel like he could have gotten some bigger near falls like he did against Kenta, but it was a good entertaining match. One thing that stuck out though was Seidel before he left, um, was really playing into the heel persona and the smugness, and he really doesn't do that much at all here. He doesn't talk to the crowd like he usually does, right? And like he just sort of
Yeah.
plays it pretty straight. And I think maybe the match would have been a little better if he showed a little bit more of that personality. Like Seidel was like slapping hands on his entrance. He was, just wasn't healing at all. And they do some fun, quick sequences. And they both block each other from hitting springboards, and they have a chop battle on the floor. And for some reason, the announcers decide they're going to make fun of the crowd in Hartford by calling them drunks. They're like, crazy acts like, what an exchange in front of the intoxicated fans here in Hartford. And then Leonard's like, yeah, they got to be drunk if they're looking under their seats for tickets. And then they go through a whole sidetrack of whether Jimmy Bauer is going to be drunk at the pay-per-view. And Leonard's like, I'd pay to see that. And just, I don't know. They were really in a silly mood, obviously, during this recording session compared to usual. But there's another spot that I really liked where Marufuji, like kind of when Marufuji did a springboard drop kick, but Seidel was standing on the apron, so it's like he did the springboard drop kick like right in front of him. I thought that was a cool spot. There was also a weird spot where Seidel tries to go for something off the top rope, but Marufuji just like kind of stood far away, and so Seidel landed on his feet and Marufuji super kicked him, and I can't tell if that was what was supposed to happen, and I'm guessing probably not. But I guess
I don't think so. That was really weird. It was just awkward.
Yeah, just awkward. There wasn't too many awkward things in the match, but there was a spot where Marufuji blocked the moonsault belly to belly, and Seidel hit a leap up Rana and got a 2 count. Marufuji blocked the Here It Is driver, hit a sudden lariat, got a big power bomb for a 2 count. And Seidel blocked the super kick and got a wacky roll up. And then Seidel got another roll up, but Marufuji got one of his own, got a fun pinning combo exchange, which Marufuji tends to like, especially during his ROH matches. And then Seidel blocked the Shiranui, went for a moonsault DDT, but Marufuji blocked that, hit the Shiranui, and got the win. Like I said, I think they could have just done more dramatic near falls so Seidel could have felt like more of a threat. This felt like Seidel regressed a little bit in terms of not his skill, but in terms of how seriously he matched up with some of the top stars. Like I feel like he seemed like a bigger deal against Kenta than he did here against Marufuji, which I wouldn't have thought made sense. So I think they worked on this match to make Seidel seem a little bit, I guess, not equal to the task the way I maybe would have expected. So in that sense, it took a lot of drama away from the match. So I thought it was a good, entertaining match, but not much more than that.
Yeah, this felt like a B-show effort, like not a terrible B-show effort, but not them doing everything they could. What they do here, it's fun enough, but there's just something that feels missing from it. Like there's an energy that I'm looking for, and I don't get that until maybe the final couple of minutes. But at the same time, I would say it's never boring. They're moseying through their usual stuff. They had a couple of fun moments that you mentioned, like the kind of really up close springboard drop kick from Marufuji. I really like that too. Seidel gets a nasty cut on his shoulder going to the ROH's infamously sharp sheet metal barricade guardrail signs. And I really think if we were keeping track of everyone that had been cut by them since we've started rewatching ROH, we'd be in the double digits by now. I don't think that's like an exaggeration. But I completely agree with you about Seidel toning down the heel stuff and kind of missing that in this match, because I feel like some defined face heel roles would have helped in this match. Like Seidel's going cocky heel, and here, like you said, it's almost non-existent here. He's slapping, like you said, fans' hands on the way. And there are just a couple moments where Marufuji shows the tiniest bit of grumpiness during this match. And I think a match where Marufuji was just a dick to an underdog Seidel, and maybe for one night you make Seidel a face again. If you're ignoring things, might as well go all the way. I think that would have been more fun than the more by the book, just vanilla trading of offense we got here. I did like Marufuji doing a couple of neat submissions in the middle of the match, including that stretch where he put all his weight on Seidel's back, as in like he took his feet completely off the canvas and was just kneeling on Seidel's back as he pulled his arms back. Like, I thought this was good, but nothing more. Maybe 3 stars, maybe 3.25. The most fun moment I did like, I noticed where Prazak, notices that the guys are brawling at ringside near a very enthusiastic fan holding a beer, and how, like you said, Prazak goes, a big exchange in front of some of the intoxicated fans in Hartford, like you said. After the match, Marufuji gets a big chant, and he even signs an autograph for a fan. And I was like, you don't see that often. Like, and that's probably a good thing, but like the desperation of like, maybe he'll sign an autograph for me during the show, and he does. He signs an autograph. But
kids are more likely to have that happen than adults, I would say.
And that brings us to Kenta defeating Delirious via pinfall in 22 minutes, 26 seconds after he hits the go to sleep. If the last match was something I call a B effort, I'd call this one a B+ effort. I thought one difference was this match had that character interplay that the prior match lacked, and I thought that helped add to this match. There's a fun in seeing how Kenta, who was, one of wrestling's surliest grumps, in his surliest era, I would say, will react to Delirious. And it's kind of interesting that Kenta actually plays along. Like, at first, Kenta acts perplexed and kind of weirded out by Delirious, and then he even speaks in Delirious-style gibberish for a second. And overall, he when he's reacting to Delirious' craziness at the start of the match, he seems like surprisingly game to play in that world for a little bit. Like, he even bites Delirious back at one point when Delirious bites him. I will say, the one time their worlds kind of clashed in a bad way was when Kenta, stiffest motherfucker on the scene, who absolutely was pasting Delirious in this match with some kicks to the chest. There's a moment where Delirious does the never-ending story clotheslines over and over again in the corner, and as they are sometimes when Delirious is doing a million of them in the corner, they look fairly weak, and Kenta's just having to stand there and sell them. And it was one of those times where it was like, it was such a huge gap in terms of physicality, where it did the opposite of suspend my disbelief. It, I guess, pended my disbelief. I don't know. It really shined a light of, like, these two guys are very different worlds, and it almost made the Delirious' clotheslines look weaker than they would have been if they had been done to most other wrestlers. But I liked Delirious being cocky early on, like he's flexing and he's ramming into into Kenta, only for him to completely freak out when Kenta threatens to throw the first kick of the match. Delirious instantly goes, "No kicks," and he becomes terrified. And that was, I think Delirious comedy, it starts to get a little old hat when you've seen a lot of it. It's fun at first. That was like, even though we've watched a lot of Delirious in the last year or two, that was genuinely funny to me. That was like, the idea that he's so confident, and then that somehow he couldn't foresee that Kenta would want to throw a kick, and he instantly becomes chicken shit. I thought that was funny. And then when the fairly fun character stuff fades away, they end up having that B+ level match. I thought, unlike the Seidel Marufuji match where it felt like they left a lot of their usual stuff on the table, these two, I think, hit most of their usual stuff. The whole pacing and build felt like maybe closer to a more top of the card match, which this is. It's the semi-main event, just maybe without them going that absolute extra mile in terms of spots and energy and near falls. So overall, I'm like right on the border of good and very good on this, maybe like a strong 3.5 to a very weak 3.75. To me, that's the level of B-show performance I'm fine with. That level of match where I know it's not your absolute best, it's not a show stealer or a match I would go out of my way to tell people they had to see, but it's still fun. It doesn't, it's a half step behind your full effort. It's not 1 or 2 full steps behind your full effort. To me, that's acceptable B-show level, match level. And it does have that character work I enjoyed. So, playing off Kenta, I thought freshened that shtick up. So, that's what I thought.
I like this a little bit less than you. I did like the character stuff at the beginning. I thought the match didn't have heat down the stretch, and that took away from me. Like, they were doing these near falls, and it felt like whatever story they were telling didn't get over with the crowd, so the crowd wasn't really reacting to what they were doing near the end. There was one pretty good near fall where Delirious hit the chemical imbalance too, and I think that got the best reaction of probably of the serious stuff in the match. But they did work hard. My favorite spot as far as during the odd couple character work at the beginning was when Delirious was very coherently yelling at Kenta. He goes, "You think you have the power? Well, if I try it one more time and I hit you one time, what happens? What happens?" Like after he tries to knock him down in the shoulder, and it was like that guy's English is getting better. Like as crazy as that sounded, it was definitely English. So I enjoyed that. I like the spot where Kenta went for a springboard and Delirious caught him on the way down with a headbutt. Um, I like that. I also like the way they got to that never-ending story clothesline spot where Kenta was sending Delirious back and forth between the buck turnbuckles and hitting a running boot each time, and then on the third try, Delirious moves and hits the long clothesline. I thought that was pretty good. But yeah, I thought just down the stretch they were trying to do a bunch of big moves, but just the crowd wasn't really with them, and I think it's because just wasn't a lot of story to the match once they got into the more athletic stuff. It just was like it kind of had that Briscoes pacing of back forth, back and forth, back and forth, to where it just didn't feel dramatic. So I didn't like it too much more than Seidel versus Marufuji, although I did appreciate the character work. But I think this might have been the least heated of all of Kenta's Ring of Honor matches so far. So, that stood out to me a little bit.
Yeah, and I know, look at the live reports, some people speculated that other people know that lack of heat, and some people speculated that was it because no one in the building thought Delirious had a chance of beating Kenta, which, that could have played into it. But one other moment, we talked, this show did have a few kind of funny commentary spots. There was one here where there's a moment in the match where Delirious is biting Kenta's leg multiple times. And at one point, Delirious bites him high in the upper thigh, so his head's like right in Kenta's crotch. And Lenny Leonard goes, "He's biting him." And then there's a pause, and he goes, "I hope he's biting him." So, I thought that was good. But and that brings us to our main event, the ROH World Tag Team title match. The Briscoes of Jay and Mark successfully defend the titles when they defeat BJ Whitmer and Takeshi Morishima in 19 minutes, 52 seconds when Jay pinned Whitmer after Mark hit him with a shooting star press. So as we mentioned, like at the top of the show, this was originally supposed to be the Briscoes versus Morishima and Nigel, but Nigel's physically banged up at this point, and so not wanting to risk his availability for their pay-per-view the next night, ROH pulls him off the show, subs in Whitmer. The original match makes a lot of sense because it would have been a classic example of Gabe's kill multiple birds with one stone style booking, where you think about it, the Briscoes beat a team with Morishima on it, so that sets up a Jay Briscoe versus Morishima title match, which actually ends up happening just 2 shows after this. At the same time, the tag format lets Morishima lose a match technically without having to take a fall. And then Nigel and Morishima losing a team would have helped to continue the tension and feud between those two that they were building. Like, in fact, it felt like even though Whitmer replaced Nigel, it felt to me like they likely did the spot they originally had for the original match, because late in the match, Whitmer holds one of the Briscoes for Morishima to attack him, but the Briscoe dodges at the last second, and Morishima hits Whitmer, which starts like the chain of reaction of stuff that leads to the loss. So you could have easily imagined, that would have been the finish to help set up some more dissension and anger and tension between Nigel and Morishima, and they just do it here with Whitmer instead. But all that being said, Matt, here's our big main event. What'd you think about it?
I like this match more than I expected to, which is kind of funny to think about because obviously everyone in the match is good. And it made me think 2 things. One, could this match have been, that much better if Nigel was in it? But on the other hand, the fact that the other big star wasn't in it allowed them to focus a lot more on the Briscoes versus Morishima dynamic. And I think that was what made me really like this match. I think that dynamic was really strong. First of all, Whitmer got booed a lot. And do you think that that's because the crowds were getting sick of Whitmer, or do you think that's because they were mad that he replaced Nigel?
I don't know. I thought that was really interesting because, we are just ending the era where Whitmer's probably the most over he ever will be, at least in Ring of Honor. He just had probably the 2 best well-received things he will ever do in his career, which is his part in the CZW feud and the Jimmy Jacobs feud. And we talk about how Homicide's momentum went completely away, but that was partly due to booking after he won the world title. It's after that Jacobs feud, maybe this is I noticed exactly what you did. Maybe this is a one-off, but I was like, man, they really don't like BJ. It sounds like at the start of the match, it was a couple fans razzing him, and I felt like, oh, it's just a couple fans, and I was kind of thinking like you were kind of wondering, which is it just because Whitmer's in the unenviable position of having to replace someone that everyone wanted to see, but then by the end of the match, it felt like late in the match when Morishima tagged out to Whitmer, the boos had caught on to where he gets pretty loudly booed by a lot of people. Like, and it's weird. It was like it really feels like the era of BJ Whitmer being somewhat over ended like immediately after the high point. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, good timing because he's going to turn heel soon, but
Yeah.
still interesting. But like to me, the story of the match was the Briscoes. I thought were awesome working against Morishima. Morishima did a great job in his role too, but I thought the Briscoes just really cracked the code of like how it would make sense for them to work Morishima. My favorite spots involved him like no selling some of the Briscoes' most powerful stuff, like when they try to do the double team shoulder block and he just no sells it. Then he runs through a double clothesline and hits a double clothesline on both of them. I really like that spot. In the early part of the match, they're trying to like knock him down and they just keep falling down. So they do a double team, like where Mark, like Mark is like caught by Morishima and Jay comes off the top with a drop kick to knock Morishima down. And then they start springboarding and getting Morishima down. I thought that was pretty good. I liked so the Briscoes matches. What we always criticize is that there's so much back and forth, and they don't do a real heat segment. They do a real heat segment here, where Morishima and Whitmer are working over Mark Briscoe, and I thought that helped the match a lot because it's a few minutes long. There's a spot where Morishima knocks Jay off the apron so he can't tag. There's Mark is finally able to avoid some Whitmer shots and a leaping forearm, and then he gets blocked from tagging in, so Mark super kicks Whitmer, and finally he gets a real hot tag on Jay, like a proper hot tag, and Jay, does a lot of big moves immediately, Death Valley drivers. Whitmer boots Morishima off the apron. There's a spot where Morishima comes in and just stands toe to toe with Jay with striking, but Morishima just knocks him down with a forearm. I like that. There's a spot where Mark does this really cool drop kick where he runs up the ropes in the corner and leaps into a close drop kick on Whitmer. There's a spot where Mark attempts a cutthroat driver, but Whitmer escapes and hits an exploder, and Morishima comes in and he busts out the cartwheel and the missile drop kick, and they try another double shoulder block on Morishima, but this time he counters with a leaping double cross body, which I thought was very cool. And then Morishima goes up top again, but the Briscoes catch him and hit a double team superplex, which again, very cool. And they do a double big boot on Morishima and get a 2 count. And then Jay keeps trying to boot him, so Morishima just screams in his face. So Jay just lifts Morishima up and drops backwards, dumping Morishima on his face. I just really liked all the Briscoes Morishima interactions a lot. Jay goes up to do he hits a blockbuster on Morishima and he goes up to do another, but Morishima just catches him with a belly to belly. And like you said, then he tags in Whitmer and gets the chorus of boos, and that's when we get to the finish where Jay ducks while Whitmer is holding him, and Morishima clotheslines Whitmer, and they end up getting that Jay driller into the shooting star press for the Briscoes to get the win. But what I liked about this match was that it was just good to the point, not overly indulgent. They had the back and forth part early, but the heat segment on Mark was good. The hot tag was good. Morishima busted out some things you haven't seen from him yet. I think the Briscoes were really, really good here. They kind of reined in their most, I guess, indulgent habits and instincts, and I thought that improved the match a bit. So to me, this was the match of the night for sure, and it made me want to see more of the Briscoes against Morishima.
I think I liked this match a bit less than you, but at the same time, I think the things I liked about it and the reasons why I liked it are like the exact same as the reasons you had. As a match when Whitmer is in, and even at some points when Morishima is in, I felt like it's a mid-tier 2006, 2007 Briscoes style tag. It's like that consistent mid-tempo, hard-working action that just keeps going, doesn't have anything really else like selling or character work. Maybe sometimes here, I felt like you did get that face and peril sequence, but it was a little bit short and perfunctory, but it's enjoyable enough. But we've seen it so many times, and I've talked before how it's a bit numbing. And Whitmer, for his his part. He doesn't do anything wrong here, but he's kind of like that era of Briscoes match boiled down into a human being where he's a generic hard worker who needs a setting or team or reason to go in, to give him some reason to go into crazy excess to really elevate him to something great. But to like what you were saying about the match, the moments where Morishima steps in the ring are a lot of fun. Like, to me, most of the joy I got from this match is seeing the Briscoes, the tag champs, the long established and beloved ROH act, getting to do different twists on stuff with Morishima, like the one guy who is pushed to a different level of dominance to everyone else. Like, to me, one of the key spots of the match was the ones you already went over, which is when the Briscoes do the double football tackle, which is a spot they do all the time in almost all their tag matches. It always knocks their opponents off their feet. And it doesn't work here. It doesn't knock Morishima off. He stays standing, and then he levels them with that double clothesline. And to me, it's one of those thoughts that, again, it seems so simple, but if you watch Ring of Honor consistently, it's like no one does that. I don't think I've seen someone like just no-sell it like that and take them out. It always works, and that's the fun of this match. And that's the fun of Morishima, right? Like, he's allowed to react in ways to other guys on the roster that no one else in the company is. He is pushed a different way. So, and it works in the opposite direction too. Like, it's cool seeing Jay go toe to toe on strikes with Morishima at one point and holding his own, where it's like, wow, it's cool that he's like not going down. It makes him look tough for being able to do it against Morishima, where if he just did that strike exchange with anyone else, it'd be like, oh, it's just your usual strike exchange. And maybe because both Briscoes did it at the same time, when the Briscoes superplex Morishima's been doing a thing lately where he like pops up right away from a superplex and, kind of no-sells that. But this time he only gets back to one knee and he's just like angry. And I felt, again, there was this fun, thread of like, the Briscoes together can kind of hurt Morishima in some ways that maybe other people can't. And Morishima, can withstand things that the Briscoes do together in some ways they can't. Like, in a weird way, this is not I thought Whitmer was fine this match. I kind of would have loved to see Morishima versus the Briscoes in a handicap match. Like, just give me 10 minutes of that, because I thought that was all the most fun stuff. Like, all the stuff you talked about, like that.
Yeah. Well, that I think was maybe the benefit of not having Nigel in this match, is that they got to focus more on that, because probably Nigel would have been a bigger focus if he was involved.
Yeah, they would have had to have given, more. It would have been more of the story would have been Nigel and Morishima and their stuff along with the Briscoe stuff than just the story being Briscoes, and Morishima. I love that spot too, where Morishima does the running crossbody and he hits both Briscoes with it at the same time and takes them both over with it. I thought that was just so cool. Like, and yeah, I felt a little bad for BJ for the reasons we talked about, where it's like, especially knowing that like it's not going to get better for, like, you were like, well, he gets a heel run, but it's like, is it going to get better for him because he's starting a long losing streak, and then when he gets repackaged, it's as part of the Hangman 3, which isn't exactly going to set the world on fire. So
yeah, but he does still get like a decent length run. He's there for years later. You know what I mean? And also, how bad can we feel for him? Given given things he's actually done in life. It is one of those weird things. Yeah. As far as we know, yeah.
Yeah. All that being said, I thought this was a strong 3.5-star match. Like I said, it's a mid-level Briscoes tag of the era, but it's got some real fun Morishima interactions that really make it pop.
The big difference that I have with you is I also sometimes feel numbed by these Briscoes matches, and this match I did not feel that. I thought that the pace that they worked and like the structure was a lot more on point this time. So I think that's the difference in our opinions.
Yeah, I still felt the numbing a little bit a few times, but again, I completely agree with you that like the best stuff with the Morishima stuff is really great and interesting and fresh for both sides. But and then we end the show with the first installment of a series of short videos ROH uploaded to YouTube at the time over the course of, I believe, just a few days, documenting Jimmy Jacobs spending 4 days wooing Lacey. I believe all the videos, or at least all the rest of them, are included on the DVD version of the next show. But this one starts with Jimmy dressing up, telling us that Lacey's about to arrive at the airport, and this is going to be the best 4 days of his life. We get a title graphic that says Jimmy Jacobs in association with ROH Wrestling presents Love to Spare. Jimmy's got a tie on and everything, and he says, you can call this a documentary. You can call it a how-to guide for all you jocks that don't know how to romance a woman. But he and Lacey are just going to have fun together. Lacey looks amused but skeptical. Jimmy's first idea, bowling. He asks Lacey if she likes bowling. She doesn't. Jimmy then limps, having trouble carrying both balls and his crutch to length 35, because remember, at this point, he is still recovering from knee surgery, and he still has using a cane, a crutch, I think. We cut to Lacey at a hotel, who says she agreed to spend 4 days with Jimmy, and they're not off to a great start. And we then see footage of Jimmy helping her learn to bowl. She throws a gutter ball. Jimmy, in a split scene at the hotel, as more of their bowling footage plays, says he doesn't know what he was thinking with the bowling. He's an awful bowler with 2 legs, and right now he has 1 leg and a cane. In retrospect, a bad idea, he says. We then see Jimmy bowling, and he's hobbling to the line with a cane, and he then knocks over a few pins with a throw, which I was like kind of impressed by. I was like, hey, with 1 leg, you still managed to hit a few. We then cut to Jimmy and Lacey drinking at the bowling alley bar. Jimmy asks Lacey if it was at least a little fun. She shrugs kind of unconvincingly, like she does not seem to be into it. Jimmy excuses himself to use the bathroom, and as he does, a guy immediately steals Jimmy's seat and starts flirting with Lacey, which is very cheesy, and Lacey does not enjoy it. The mystery creep guesses that Lacey's name starts with a vowel, saying that pretty names always start with a vowel, which, Matt, I guess our names aren't pretty, which is a sad thing to learn. But Lacey tries to brush him off, but he isn't getting the message. Jimmy comes back and says the lady is spoken for. When the guy talks back, Jimmy tosses the dude to the ground and says again, the lady is spoken for. Jimmy asks Lacey if she wants to get out of here, and she goes, I do, actually. And they leave together. Back at the hotel, Jimmy says he thinks Lacey liked that, and in a separate hotel room interview, Lacey does confirm that she did, in fact, like that, and says Jimmy redeemed himself by standing up for her. They'll see how the rest of the trip goes. And then we cut to Jimmy walking Lacey to her hotel room. They apparently have different rooms on the floor, on the same floor for this little get-together. Jimmy apologizes for the creep at the bar. Lacey thanks him for stepping in and says no one has done something like that for her before ever, which seems kind of depressing. Like no one has ever stood up for you ever. We cut to Jimmy at the hotel saying at the end of the night he only got the old wave goodbye, but there's always tomorrow. And that's the end of this first part. This was really heavy in the vibes of reality and dating shows of the time, like, mingling the footage of a date with a lot of clips of separate post-game interviews that the two people involved had. I feel like a lot of Jimmy Jacobs stuff, it's kind of earnest, it's kind of cringy, it's kind of cheesy. I give credit to him as being one of the only people on the roster at this point who was thinking outside the box a little, shooting stuff between shows in other locations, still doing this attempt at long form storytelling and character development. It's one of those things where, by the standards of halfway decent scripted TV, this is very formulaic and stilted, but by the standards of 2007 ROH, it stands out simply because it's a non-wrestling segment. That's ambitious in any way at all, even if that's not the primary reason that most of us were watching Ring of Honor at the time, was for out of the box backstage segments. I still appreciate that Jimmy was attempting to carve a niche for himself in a world where maybe he knew he couldn't quite compete with the Danielsons of the world, being a DVD selling it wrestler. Well, I know that for a fact. He said in interviews that he was trying to carve that niche out for himself because he knew he couldn't be that guy. And so, yeah, it's an interesting snapshot of him trying basically to recapture lightning and ball. And I don't think it works quite as well, but it sets things up for the future. It's him trying in a way to do the 3 music videos again, right? Which saved his job.
Yeah, by any real standards, it's bad, but by wrestling skit standards, it's enjoyable. I will say though, I don't know if it was really consistent with who their characters are. You know what I mean? These could have just been 2 normal people, and Lacey is clearly portrayed as a maniac, and she just seems like when that guy comes to hit on her and stuff, the Lacey that we've been watching would have been way more aggressive with him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she would have screamed at him,
screamed at him, you disgusting man, right?
Yeah.
And and Jimmy would have been kind of a psychopath because that's kind of his character, but he's just sort of a cute, awkward guy here. I mean, he does obviously chuck the guy off the stool in a more aggressive way than most people would, but still, he doesn't hit him with a spike. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
Lacey just seems very not demure, but just like very laid back here,
Yeah,
considering so like I think, maybe they could have been took a little more effort into being like, what would my character actually do here
yeah.
versus just like what would two people do? But, it was cute. It was cute enough. I didn't mind it.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my pet peeves whenever someone says something about wrestling, they praise it by saying that's cinema, where it's always like, if you compare even some of the best wrestling angles, like some of them approach decent quality acting, but most of even wrestling angles I would say are pretty damn great that I really enjoy. If you compare that to the standards of even like halfway decent film or TV, like the acting and the character motivation and all that stuff, it's not even close.
No, no, no,
Like,
no.
like,
Good wrestling acting is still bad acting. Like
yeah,
the best wrestling promos are the ones where, the wrestlers really aren't acting. You know what I mean? Like that's
yeah.
because they're not actors. I mean, most of them aren't. Even the ones that are, I feel like in the wrestling context, it doesn't come off as like good acting. Like I don't think I've ever like John Cena, for example, is a professional actor who has had some success. He obviously hasn't won any awards or anything, but like I've never seen a John Cena promo where I was like, well, that's just brilliant acting right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and obviously like these, Lacey and Jimmy Jacobs are, not professionals in any way, so you just got to
Yeah.
take it as like a cute little like high school film, and on that level, it's perfectly cute.
It's like people a couple years ago wanted Raw to be nominated for an Emmy, and not to be too mean, but I just wanted to say to those people, like, watch literally
Yeah,
any TV show that had been nominated for the Emmys in that year. Like,
yeah,
watch any other show and
right.
tell me if that's in the same realm of anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, of
Uh,
course.
so Matt, that brings us to the Matt F. Trophy. What the heck is going to win the Matt F. Trophy this week
Yeah, I
or
don't know.
episode?
I don't know if this is cheating or not, but I'm going to give it to the Briscoe brothers, plural. I guess I can because I've given it to like the crowd before. So I feel like I could give it to two people. I thought the Briscoes did a great job in their match. I think that they really, like I said, kind of cracked the code of like how their dynamic with Morishima would work. I think they were both equally good in that role. I think they also, like I said, reined in some of their worst, most overindulgent habits in their match and put together a really enjoyable match that I think made me want to watch more of that matchup. So I think they stood out to me on this show. I mean, nobody had the performance of a lifetime on this show, but I thought theirs was my favorite.
Yeah, that made me more pumped to rewatch I don't remember what I thought of it at the time, but that made me, this match definitely made me more pumped to rewatch the Jay versus Morishima match that I know is coming up in a couple shows. So that was, Reborn Again. And I'll say, I think one of the first ways we can sum up the show, because I am remembering to sum up shows again, is we spent almost, I think, roughly an hour talking about we opened the show spending like roughly an hour talking about Reborn Again related stuff, and we are still finishing this episode in like 2.5 hours. So like
It would have been like
this
an
show
hour and a
would,
half episode. Yeah.
yeah, this would have been maybe our shortest episode ever, if not for the shit ton of stuff I include. So like I think that kind of tells you something
This is a
about
B-ass B show. Even though Danielson came back, he like barely came back. So like this is like, yeah, this is the B-est of shows.
I would call this almost this is something we've seen a few times, a B show with A show ingredients, where we've seen this sometimes where like RH is prepping to do a really big show with maybe some fly-ins and stuff. And so they have a lot of those same talents on the Friday show, and they have all the ingredients to do something really good, and they still just do a B show. Like you got Morishima and Kenta brought in, and they do just kind of B show matches. You've got Danielson's first match in the Ring of Honor in 4.5 months, and it just feels like they were like, oh shit, what do we got to? He can take every spot.
What do we do? What do we do with this guy? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of stuff on the undercard where it's fine performances by guys they're trying out, like Bobby Fish, Blade and Edwards, guys like that. And there's a lot of like really short, insubstantial matches that are somewhat fun, but like it is, yeah, like you said, it's one of the more B-ass B shows. And going back to that point earlier, the idea that Gabe suggested that this could be a starting point for anybody, this would be like one of the last. It's not even a terrible, like it's not like I didn't have a decent time watching the show, because as we always talk about, Ring of Honor this era has a really high floor. I had a perfectly enjoyable time watching the show, but like this would be one of the last shows from this era I would recommend anyone to be like, oh, you want to start Ring of Honor? Well, this is going to get you started. And I don't even really think it kicks off like big storylines or anything.
No, just start with respect is earned if you're going to do that. Yeah. You miss nothing by skipping the show.
Because I realized like it's a start point because they had a big talent exodus. Not only did the TNA guys get pulled, Daniels had just left, Cabana had just left. So this should have been a place for him like doing Reborn Stage 1 in 2004 where they made a real big 2 back-to-back eye-catching shows. But they didn't. They gave you a really, really B-est B-show and then a pay-per-view. So, and that brings us to plugs. That would be ThROH@gmail.com. THROH for through. We got a really nice email recently. I got a DM I haven't shared you recently. We always get these drips every episode or two. A couple people like, I just discovered the show, which is, it's nice after like 3/4 of a decade, people still discover. That's always a nice feeling. You want to contact us at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. We're also under similar names on Blue Sky. Just search for it. You'll find it easy. Next time on the show, we will be covering Ring of Honor's first pay-per-view ever, Respect is Earned. I know for people, because I know some people who listen to the show like to follow along watching with us, we will be covering the DVD version, which means we will be watching the whole 2-hour pay-per-view and the extra hour of matches they taped at the show that weren't on the pay-per-view that were on the DVD release. So if you want to follow along, just note that if you want to know about everything we're talking about, acquire the DVD version somehow. And yeah, it's going to have a lot of shit to talk about. Matt, we might have to, I'm going to have to come up with a strategy. We might have to pretend to be between the sheets for one episode. I might have to do a thing with some of that torch talk where you pretend to be one of them and I pretend to be the other person, just so we split it up a bit. But it should be interesting. It should be fun. And yeah, it's a big show with a lot of things to talk about. So until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.